Good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you all doing today? Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I just want to welcome each of you to our panel discussion this morning on lung cancer. You're going to hear a lot of information, and you're going to learn quite a lot today. You're going to meet some amazing people throughout 3 different panels that we have scheduled for today. So I want you to be prepared to ask questions and to learn to soak this in, because it is a lot of important information that isn't expressed often in the African American community. And we want to change that by bringing awareness to the African American context about lung cancer, as well as how to prevent it, how to detect it, how to screen it, and how to treat it so that it doesn't claim the lives of many of our moms and dads and brothers and sisters and friends. We know that we can defeat any cancer if we learn enough, work together, and believe strong enough that it can be defeated. So I'm so glad to have each of you here. If you're joining us online, I just want to say a big welcome to you as well. Even though you're not in the building, you are here with us in spirit. We can sense your presence. I want to encourage you to be active on the chat space. We would love to make certain that you're asking questions, and we'll identify those questions during our Q&A sessions. We'll make certain that we cue in your questions as well. So in the chat space, please ask those questions. Let us know that you're there. We'd love to interact with you as well as those who are in the room. Well, I want to welcome each of you to New Life Church. This venue is so honored to sponsor and host this conversation this morning. And I would ask if you would join me, please, in an opening word of prayer. Father, we thank you for allowing us the benefit and the grace of being present this morning. Thank you, God, that you have given us this platform to speak about such an important and concerning topic, not only for African Americans and people in communities of color, but for all the people of every race, every gender, every nationality and ethnic group. Cancer is not a discriminative disease. And we know, God, that you are stronger than any illness or disease that attaches itself to our bodies. So we thank you for medical professionals and practitioners, for doctors, for nurses, for scientists, for researchers, those who are on the forefront of fighting this disease and many other diseases. We just ask for your grace and clarity over our time together this morning, that as we discuss these topics and as we go over this information, that you would allow for it to clearly resonate with those in our audience today, online, and anyone who would view this taping in the future. I thank you now that your presence is here, and where you are, there is always joy and there's always peace. And so give a special anointing to our experience today and grant us your favor. And we ask this in the precious name of Jesus, we pray. And all the people said, amen and amen again. Well, let me quickly give you what our program objectives are. We have just a few objectives that we need to make certain we do in the course of this time together over the 3 panels that we'll have over the next couple of hours that we'll spend together. One is to understand the causes and the history of lung cancer. To understand the causes and the history of it. 2 is to recognize the risk factors of lung cancer and how those risk factors are heightened in the African American community. And then 3, to understand why health disparities exist in lung cancer detection as well as lung cancer screening. The detection of lung cancer is how we are able to identify that it's in the body and screen for it. And we want to find out why there is such disparities between communities of color and communities of non-color, why that disparity exists in both detection, screening, as well as in treatment. And then fourthly, we would love to understand why screening is beneficial to detecting lung cancer early. Why is it beneficial to detecting lung cancer early, and then to understand what the process for screening looks like from the patient's perspective. So these 5 objectives are what we're hoping we cover and give clear, solid information about this topic today. And so we have some physicians and other healthcare professionals here who are going to discuss patient support, reducing barriers to screening, and other resources to help with insurance coverage and costs. We're going to talk about low-dose CT, which is a powerful tool that leads to increased detection of cancers at an earlier, more treatable stage, making it imperative that lung cancer screening with this imaging technique be provided to African American patients who greatly need it and can greatly benefit from it. We're going to learn a lot in our time together today, and we have some wonderful folks to help make certain that happens. So I want to ask you to do something real important for us. When you came in, you were given pre-workshop surveys. You were given a pre-workshop survey in your packets. Does everybody see that? Does everybody have that? A nod, a yes would help me out. All right, excellent, excellent, excellent. We need you to fill out that pre-panel, pre-workshop survey. It's critical for our research, it's critical for capturing data, and it's critical for helping us provide more resources and panels and discussions like these that are going to be beneficial for our community. So please, if you would, fill out those pre-workshop surveys. Well, I want to recognize our sponsors. We are blessed to have some amazing sponsors to help us make certain that the word gets out, this information is shared. We network with New Life Community Alliance, which is the alliance outreach arm of our church. It ministers and sponsors programs, activities, and services to the local South DeKalb community in a myriad of ways, and we're just honored to have them as one of the sponsors of this event today. Also, Amgen Pharmaceutical Company is a sponsor of this event. We are delighted to have their interest in African American issues as related to health concerns, and it's a big step for a major pharmaceutical company to show this level of interest at this particular context of conversation. So we're grateful that Amgen is a part of our discussion, and we have had as a longtime support and friend of New Life and this community at large as it relates to health, and that is Heal Collaborative. Heal Collaborative, and they are friends of ours, supporters of ours. They're on the front line of producing information, quality access to that information and healthcare resources. Heal Collaborative have been a major support. We are happy to have the National Director of Heal Collaborative, of the Faith-Based Initiatives and Policy section with us today. This is Mr. Stan Watson, who is no stranger to South DeKalb. He's a friend, a leader, a comrade, a sergeant in arms. He's all of that and more. Stan is such a wonderful asset to our community. Please receive Stan as he comes to give us a strong welcome and greeting.
Good morning. Oh, we can do better than that. Good morning. I've known Pastor Harris for a number of years. I'm not going to tell you how long because he knows how long because I put my glasses on this morning. I am so delighted to be here, and thank you, New Life, for hosting us today at this wonderful event. You know, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others, as stated by Dr. Martin Luther King. Each day I'm reminded of HEAL's work, dedication, and commitment to eradicating health disparities within the walls of the African American community. So I'd like to take the time on behalf of HEAL and our board of directors to thank you for joining us this morning in an interactive and in-depth discussion featuring a unique public-private collaboration to address health disparities in lung cancer. We have assembled policymakers, pastors, community leaders, patient and healthcare providers. HEAL and our sponsor Amgen is committed to closing the widening health equity gap that affects patients diagnosed with lung cancer. We believe that we can proactively and successfully achieve our mission where there is an action-focused collaboration among community stakeholders like yourselves. These stakeholders bring a unique perspective and ability to help shape the policies and practices that will change the outcome of lung health disease for the underserved communities in the United States. Health inequities impact Black communities in the U.S., and it stems because we have a lack of awareness and a lack of information. Today, with biomarker testing that we have recently passed in Georgia, the results can be timely, diagnosis can be targeted, and treatment, we can make sure we improve health outcomes. So please join us this morning as we inform, discover, and reveal a diverse lineup of speakers for a solution-based conversation of ways that we can improve our health in our African American community. We thank again our hosts and sponsors, Amgen in collaboration with Heal Collaborative and New Life Church. So on behalf of our entire team, our board of directors at Heal, we thank you for hosting us this morning. And as the church would say, open your eyes and your ears, be hearers of the words, but not just hearers only. You have to be doers of the word and make it a good world for us to live in. Thank you so very much on behalf of Heal.
Let's give Stan Watson another hand, and a big thank you for being here and for lending his voice and support to this conversation. Well, we have some subject matter experts as well as physicians that are going to be with us today, and I want to introduce two of them to you. One is Dr. Wayne B. Tuckson, MD of Louisville, Kentucky. He is with us today, and I think that deserves a real strong round of applause for having him with us. Dr. Tuckson is going to be our keynote speaker on lung cancer. He is a retired colon and rectal surgeon based in Louisville, a graduate of Howard University School of Medicine. Dr. Tuckson is a past president of the Greater Louisville Medical Society and is a recipient of the Community Service Award from the Kentucky Medical Society, the Thomas J. Wallace Award for Leadership in Promoting Health Awareness and Well-Being for Citizens of Jefferson County, which was given by the city of Louisville, and he's also a recipient of the Lyman T. Johnson Distinguished Leadership Award given by the Louisville Central Community Centers. It's an honor to have him here with us to discuss this important subject today. I also want to introduce Dr. Lawrence Sanders, who is also going to serve on our panel. Dr. Sanders was the primary care physician that was on the prostate cancer panel that we had just a few months back. Dr. Lawrence is a Heal Collaborative's medical director and chief medical officer. He is also the medical director of the Grady Health System, where he serves as the physician advisor for clinical documentation improvement, care management, and hospital throughout. He practices internal medicine and believes that good health is the result of individuals, groups, organizations, neighborhoods, and communities working to create the conditions in every neighborhood that fosters good health. Dr. Sanders is ABMS board certified in internal medicine. He teaches along with business principles and patient safety and quality improvement to residents and medical students as an associate professor at Morehouse School of Medicine right here in Atlanta, Georgia. We are absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Lawrence Sanders with us as well as Dr. Wayne Tuckson. One more time, give both of them a very strong welcome. Let me get out of the way and let Dr. Tuckson come and share with us a bit about lung cancer. Please get ready to take your notes. Dr. Tuckson.
Thank you very much, Pastor Harris. I appreciate that. And I hope that there was some clapping for people from Kentucky coming out there. There it is, always good. It's good to get out every now and then, isn't it? Some of you may be a little concerned about a colorectal surgeon standing up here talking about lung cancer. And the thought did cross my mind too. But I was reminded of a gentleman who was sitting for a final examination to get a PhD in zoology, study of animals. And he knew everything there was to know about worms. He was the leading expert on worms, as I may consider myself about colon and rectal, though others may argue. But nonetheless, he knew everything about worms. So he sat down. The first question the examiner asked him, tell me about elephants. Now, this guy knew nothing about elephants. He got ashen, he got scared, his pulse went up, blood pressure dropped, and he panicked. He said, well, elephants have long trunks. They have two types. African elephants have big ears, Indian elephants have little ears, and they have a big body. And when you get down to the end of the elephant, there's this tail. Now, the tail looks like worms. Now, there are many different kinds of worms that are out there in the world, and he proceeded to tell them all about the worms. Well, as a colorectal surgeon, I know a little bit about bad air, and I think I'm going to relate that to what's going on as far as lung cancer is concerned. At least we'll try to keep it clean. By the way, before I go on, Pastor Harris, I must tell you, this is a very, very impressive facility that you have, and I'm really impressed with your level of community activism as far as maintaining the health and wellness of the African American community. I must admit, I'm just overwhelmed by that. All right, let's see. I am hitting the buttons, but I'm not doing something right for that. I've broken your system already, and this is why people won't let me use their toys. But when we're talking about lung cancer, let's just say it is a very, very common disease. In fact, it represents the #2 cancer that occurs in everybody. It is second only behind breast cancer is #1 in women. Prostate cancer, of course, is #1 in men. Thank you very much. I should also point out Justin Williams. Thank you very much for helping organize things. Thank you, Justin. It is the #1 cause of death due to cancer, though, across the board. And there are going to be about 127,000 deaths a year from lung cancer. The death rate in men is slightly higher than what it is in women. But when you think about, again, the magnitude of the problem of lung cancer, it represents about 1/5, and you can even say in some cases up to 1/4 of all deaths to cancer. That's more than combined for prostate, breast, and colon and rectal cancer. This is a very common problem, one which we need to take very seriously. It is estimated that for the year of 2023, there are going to be about 238 or almost 240 new cases of colon and rectal cancer. Interestingly enough, more will be in men than women because unfortunately the rate for women is starting to go up a little bit more and surpassing men. But again, it is a very, very common cancer. Non-smokers do get cancer, though we always talk about smokers getting cancer, but this can also happen in non-smokers. And a non-smoker is someone who smokes anywhere from 0 to 100 cigarettes per year in their entire lifetime. And when you look at patients who are non-smokers who are getting cancer, about 30,000 of these cases of lung cancer occur in this subpopulation. And we'll get into that in a minute about where some of this may be coming. A big problem is when we talk about secondhand smoke. That is where somebody is smoking and someone's in the environment where the smoke is now present. And then there's something called third-hand smoke, where the smoke is prevalent in the clothing, in the furniture, in the carpeting of areas. These two things also contribute to increased risk for developing of lung cancer, up to about 7,300 cases per year. Now here's the big thing about lung cancer and smoking. Smokers have about a 15 to 30% increased risk of developing lung cancer compared to those who are non-smokers. For black men, it's about 12% increased rate over that for white men. Interestingly enough, for African-American females, they have a lower rate of death from lung cancer when compared to white females. So let's look at the numbers. Who is it that's getting lung cancer? Right now, it tends to be a disease of folks who are in the older age group. So you see the largest number are going to be folks who are 70 to 74 years of age, followed by individuals who are 65 to 69, and then you have the 75 to 79 group, then followed by the 55 to 59 age group. So it tends to be folks who are above the age of 65. Georgia, where we are right now, at least where I am right now, represents about 36 lung cancer deaths per 100,000 population. So again, it's pretty common. If you look at where the highest or the lowest mortality rate from lung cancer, it happens to be in New York. They have about a 25% 5-year survival rate. And 5-year survival rate means someone who's been diagnosed and treated for a disease and they're alive after 5 years. The worst is in Louisiana, where there's about a 16% 5-year survival rate. In Georgia, somewhere around 18%. So it is on the high side, but it clearly is not the highest, but still too high. The death rate, again, per 100,000, for black males, it's about 48.7%, almost 50%. For African-American females, about 26.8%. So African-American females, again, lower death rate, below the national average. Black men were way above the national average. The #1 risk factor, I think we can end the whole conversation right now, is smoking. Smoking, smoking, smoking. However you get it in, it's bad for us. Cigarettes, of course, is the Most common thing we see right now in the African American community, we tend to have a tendency to smoke cigarettes that are still mentholated. Though there's some legislation proposed, the FDA is trying to get a thing outlawing flavored cigarettes and things. That has not passed unless someone knows something I don't know. But as I'm last aware, it has not passed yet. And the problem with mentholated cigarettes, we tend to take that in a deeper breath, it gets in deeper, and we tend to hold it in a little longer. And this may contribute to some of the problems in African-American males. Of course, we have problems with pipes, cigars, secondhand smoke, as I mentioned before, is something when you're exposed to smoke being released by somebody who is smoking. Third-hand smoke, that which is in the environment around the furniture, clothing, etc., which is a particular problem when you think about kids. Where are kids? They're crawling around on the carpeting, they're on the sofa and the other activities. They're having this increased risk. Vaping and e-cigarettes, though the jury's not determine exactly how bad it is, we do know that rates are higher in this population because we talked about that the average age of people developing lung cancer tends to be around 65 and above. Vaping has been around too late for us to see that, but clearly the same pollutants or many of the same pollutants and toxins that are going in when cigarette smoking are happening with vaping, and it is anticipated that vaping and e-cigarettes will have the same numbers. Some people ask, what about family history? Because you can sometimes see lung cancer in different members of a family. Well, a lot of that has to do with one person is smoking, other people are going to smoke too. So if a kid sees their mother smoking or see the father smoking, they're probably going to smoke too. However, we do know that for patients that have a family history of at least one other person having lung cancer, their rates have gone up. So again, it may be because of the smoking, though there may be some genetic predilection in terms of being able to break down the toxic materials or those carcinogens that may have some impact. We do know, again, if there are 2 or more first-degree relatives, that means parents, brothers, sisters, or children have lung cancer, the rates again are even higher. But again, it's hard to say because one member of the family tends to do the same thing as other families do. So in terms of the role of genetics, it's hard to say as far as lung cancer, but it probably does play a role somewhat. Other risk factors are HIV positivity, but in this subpopulation of people, there's a higher incidence of cigarette smoking, so that may be the reason why we see a higher incidence in them. Then beta-carotene supplements. There was an idea before about using high doses of beta-carotene. What you find in carrots may have some protective influence on lung smoke and cigarette smokers, but what it actually turns out, people who have high intake of beta-carotene actually have a worse outcome, so it doesn't seem to be protective for those patients. Then there are other toxins such as asbestos, arsenic, chromium, nickel, beryllium, and then cadmium. These are all, again, associated with increased risk for lung cancer. Something a lot of us don't think about is radon. Radon is a radioactive gas that's formed from the breakdown of uranium, and it's in rocks and soils. You tend to see it very common in mountainous areas or in areas where you have a lot of coal, but also you can find it in low-lying areas also. And this accounts for almost 25% of cases of lung cancer. Sometimes it's combined with the smoking, but even also by itself. And then there are the environmental factors, radiation that we may get from getting diagnostic studies, such as with x-rays or even radiation outside, but most of it is from diagnostic studies. And the next thing which I want to talk about is air pollution, because this is a really, really big problem, particularly in African American, Hispanic, and in populations of low socioeconomic area. We know that people who are in these areas have an increased exposure to particulate matter of 2.5 microns. These are very small little particulate matter that have the ability to get down into our lungs. Now, the problem with particulate matter of 2.5 or PM 2.5 just to be for short, is that it seems to stimulate or increase the amount of cytokines and inflammatory response, and also causes some changes to the genetic material that helps and leads to the development of some cancers, or at least allowing the development of some cancers. So this is a big problem, and unfortunately, in our communities, we tend to find higher concentrations of this. So when looking at zip code tabulation areas, or ZCTA, they found that as the black population increased, so did the concentration of PM 2.5. So we know that these harmful particles are increased concentration in African American communities. And if you happen to live in a white area, it tended to be lower. Coincidence, you can argue. Other things about this, again, as I said, for each 10 microgram increase in PM25, there's an 8 to 14 incidence of lung cancer. Let's think about that. So we can demonstrate that with certain pollutants, we know that they are as bad or can accentuate the impact of cigarette smoking on our populations. Now, there was an article that appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution back in February of this year, and they were talking about development along South Fulton Parkway. If I'm not mistaken, isn't that an area predominantly African-American community down that way? Okay. And what's going to happen? They want to increase the number of warehouses in that neighborhood. And what that means is by increasing the number of warehouses, you're going to increase the number of diesel truck traffic. And by increasing the amount of diesel truck traffic, what's going to happen? We're going to have diesel truck exhaust. And we know that this contains a lot of pollutants. So, you know, all of a sudden you find we're willing to put these industries in areas where we have large numbers of African Americans, exposing them to increased air pollution, which is making a bad situation worse. So when we start looking at some of the numbers of saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't smoke, why am I getting lung cancer? Here's some of our answer, because of the pollutants that are in the air. What are the symptoms of lung cancer? Well, pretty straightforward. A cough that doesn't seem to get any better, chest pain, shortness of breath, I mean, you can't breathe can't get things in, wheezing, coughing up blood, just feeling tired, weight loss for no known cause. There's some peculiar other symptoms of lung cancer. Some patients have something called superior vena cava syndrome, where the cancer is in the upper part of the lobe. They get swelling of the face, neck, and arms and chest. And then there's something called Horner syndrome, where you have, because of nerve involvement, patients have a small pupil, the eyelid droops. These aren't as common as the coughing, a chronic cough, coughing up blood, and chest pain. Now, there are two big types of lung cancer when we're talking about it. There's something called small cell lung cancer and non-small cell lung cancer. Small cell lung cancer is by far and away the most aggressive and the most dangerous of the types of lung cancer that we have. In fact, the overall 5-year survival rate is only 7%. 7%. Think about that. You get this disease, you're most likely going to die. And patients who get treated oftentimes relapse within those first 5 years of their treatment. It is very rarely caught in an early stage. Now, there are different ways of staging cancer. In other words, staging to say how far advanced is the disease. A very simple way of doing things is to say something is local. In the case of lung cancer, we're talking about something confined to the lungs. Then we can say it is regional, meaning it's in the area around the lungs, in the chest. And then distant or metastatic, something that is spread beyond the confines of the area around the lungs. Brain, adrenal glands, bones, name some other areas. As you see, even for early stage disease with small cell lung cancer, there's only about a 30% 5-year survival rate. Not very good overall. Now, let's compare that to non-small cell lung cancer, which probably accounts for about 80% or more cases of lung cancer that most of us see. And there's some variations within that, too. We find that for patients who have localized disease just confined to the lungs, they've got about a 65% 5-year survival rate. Now, remember, 5-year survival rate means that you are alive after 5 years of having been treated. And most patients, if they're going to have relapse, they're going to do so within those first 5 years. So if you can make it out past 5 years, there's a pretty good chance that you can be cured of the disease. So if you can catch it early, localized, confined to the lung, 65% survival rate, 5-year survival rate. If it's regional, 37%. If it's distant, it drops down to only 9%. The bad thing about it is that about 55% of all cases of lung cancer are diagnosed with advanced stage disease. 55%. So somehow we're missing the boat as far as picking this thing up early. So the question comes down, well, how can we find lung cancer early? Because let me just tell you, all those symptoms we talked about earlier, that means the disease is present and is pretty advanced. There are no early signs of cancer. When you start having symptoms, you've got a problem. You know, it's like when you smell smoke, the fire has already started and you're now playing catch up. So the idea is to catch this before it causes symptoms or before it even develops into something. And this is what screening is all about. Screening means you're looking for a disease before the symptoms present themselves. The goal also is, a secondary goal is to find a cancer before it causes symptoms. And because if you can catch it early, you got a better chance of cure. This is not to be confused with diagnosis. Someone that comes in with coughing, bringing up blood, or feeling weak and tired, you're now doing a diagnostic study, and the prognosis is not as good. Yeah, you may catch things earlier if you come in right away, which is what we want people to do, but it still means things are a little bit out the ball game. There are a couple of ways of doing screening. One, old way, we used to think about doing cytology and chest x-ray. Let's just say it doesn't work. Did not show any real benefit in decrease in mortality rate. Now we have a very interesting tool called low-dose computed tomography. Pastor Harris already alluded to it. This is a very simple test. It's an easy thing to get done. The recommendations from the United States Preventative Services Task Force said you should get a low-dose computed tomography if you have a 20-pack year history or more of smoking, if you smoke now or have quit within the past 15 years, and if you're between the ages of 50 and 80. Remember, most cases of lung cancer occur in people after the age of 65. So if you start around age 50, you might be able to catch something pretty small or before it really develops into a significant problem. And what does a pack year mean? Well, if you smoke 10 packs of cigarettes a year, that's a 1-pack. That's a 10-pack year means you smoke 1 pack of cigarettes per day for 10 years. If you smoke 1 pack per day for 20 years or 2 packs of cigarettes a day for 10 years, that's a 20-pack year history. So that's all that really means. So what are the benefits of screening? Why should I go about trying to do this? As I said before, if you can catch the disease early, you have a better chance of curing it. So lung cancer that you can diagnose as a result of screening, so about 1.1 to 5% of all screened participants have been found to have a cancer. Again, most of these were pretty early. And this leads to a significant decrease in lung cancer mortality, up to 25%. So just think about 1 in 4. Translate that across the board, there's about 70,000 people whose lives are saved per year. So we're talking about keeping people alive. Some people wonder, well, how do I pay for this? Who's going to pay for this? Well, right now, the cost is about $241 across most healthcare plans. And this is just going back and looking at 2014 data, if 4.9 million people who were at risk for development of lung cancer were screened, it is estimated that 358,000 lives would have been saved. This means we're saving about $19,000 per life, or a savings of about $12,000 to $26,000 per life saved. So we're not only talking about financial benefit, because the cost of screening far outweighs the cost of trying to treat a person's disease, but also we now have a person who's going to be alive for their family, to see their kids grow up, and they have increased productivity and participation in the community. Some confusion comes about, well, if the screening is so good, why, do we need to ever stop it? And the answer is yes. In the case of people, when you get above the age of 81, it's not as cost effective. Or someone does not smoke for more than 15 years, not as cost effective for those individuals. Or if someone has a comorbid condition that would preclude any further treatment, in other words, if they were too sick to have surgery, then it's not a good idea for them to go on. There's a big concern right now. The Affordable Care Act mandated there'd be screening for breast, colon, prostate, of course, cervical, and lung cancer. But there's a judge down there in Texas, Federal Circuit Court, Judge Reed O'Connor, who in March 30th of this year, he struck down the provision of the Affordable Care Act requiring coverage of cancer screening. He said it wasn't necessary and that it was an overreach. Now you think about that. Something that can help decrease a person dying from cancer and increase people living, he says that it is not. By the way, this gentleman was a Trump appointee. There are some risks with lung cancer screening. There are things called false positives, where it says it's positive, but actually the disease is not present. And this may lead to someone having unnecessary further diagnostic or confirmatory tests. There's an overdiagnosis. You may find a cancer that may not cause any problem. Yes, it's there, but it may grow so slowly that the patient may die from something else beforehand, or it may not be a big deal. And then, of course, there's excess exposure to radiation. In order to confirm a diagnosis, oftentimes you do a needle biopsy, put a fine needle into the thing, take out some tissue, send it off to the pathologist to look at. This is called cytology, where they look at it under the microscope. Bronchoscopy, where someone takes a look down the throat to see if there's a tumor, you pull out some material. Bronchoscopy, but the problem is when doing the confirmatory studies, these are not free. These are not covered as part of the screening protocol. This is a cost that is borne by the patient and sometimes does cause or delays in having something done. What do you do if you identify cancer? Well, the #1 treatment right now, for cure at least, is surgery, followed by patients getting radiation therapy, chemotherapy. There are some targeted therapies that also can be used, as well as immunotherapy, and there are multiple clinical trials that are out there right now, which I do encourage people to get involved with. And then when necessary, we need to provide supportive and palliative care for people whose cancer is too advanced. And this supports not only the patient, but also the patient's family. So let me end with these things. If we're going to decrease the mortality rate from lung cancer, we need to do primary prevention. I have yet to see, and I started my life off in OBGYN. I delivered a lot of babies. I never saw a baby born with a cigarette in his mouth. This is a learned behavior. So the single best thing that we can do is if you don't smoke now, don't pick it up later. If your kids, family members are not smoking, don't let them start. We need to reinforce this. There's nothing that is good about cigarette smoking. I come from Kentucky, where they raise all that tobacco, and Senator Mitch McConnell wants to send it across the world. There is nothing good about cigarette smoking. Next, we need to get in, for those people who are smoking, let's help them get off cigarettes. Behavioral interventions. And then there's pharmacotherapy we can do, things like Chantix, nicotine replacement therapy, to wean people off. And the best thing about some of these pharmacotherapies and behavioral interventions, they work better when combined with one another rather than just singly. So it's okay to do that. To say, hey, we're going to start working with you, but also here's some medications that may help you get off of it. And then finally, we need better air pollution control. I mean, it's absurd when we think about the things that we're exposing our neighborhoods to. The toxic material. How are we going to make the air cleaner? And these are the things that we need to advocate for. It is important that people get out and vote. I think I'm bringing Coles to Newcastle coming down to Georgia, telling you all to get out and vote. But when we look at who is making the decisions about our health, we need to change those people if they're not in agreement with what we're trying to do. Get screening, by all means. Get screening with low-dose computed tomography. And again, if you have a 20-pack year history or more smoking history, if you smoke now or have not quit within the past 15 years, and between the ages of 50 and 80, get low-dose computed tomography for screening for lung cancer. And finally, if you have symptoms, or if you even think you do, and you want to check to make sure, seek evaluation and treatment early. Don't sit around. If you call for blood, that's not supposed to be there. Blood is supposed to be in our veins. If all of a sudden you shave, for men, if we shave and we cut ourselves and air starts coming out when we bleed there, I think we'd be concerned. If we cut our arm and air comes out, we'd be concerned. So if blood comes out of where air is supposed to be going in, something's wrong. Let's investigate. Let's not wait and see if it's going to get better on its own. If that check engine light comes on, we respond. When our body's check engine light comes on, please respond just as quickly. With that, I'd like to thank you very much. Pastor Harris, thank you very much for the opportunity to address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tuckson. Please come join us. Give him another hand. That was extremely informative. So, Dr. Tuckson, one of the things that you mentioned that Dr. Sanders and I here sitting listening to is the importance of screening, how significantly important it is to screen early, and you said even before we see symptoms to get that screening done. Dr. Sanders is an internal medicine primary care physician, and most people who have any challenges health-wise are going to come see you first. What can be done? What can internal medicine doctors, primary care physicians do to encourage that early screening process, especially for African Americans?
All right, thank you very much for that question, because I think this picks up on what Dr. Tuckson had to say. I think the primary care physician is your gateway to the healthcare system. And it's a conversation between you and your primary care physician that identifies the risk factors. I think if you have that 20-pack year history of smoking, that's a signal to be screened. Your primary care physician should pick up and order the test. Now, what happens if your primary care physician doesn't do that? Well, in today's world, and that's why we have this conversation, you should ask your primary care physician. What I often tell patients is that if you come in and you get nervous, write everything you need to ask me down on a card. That way you know that your needs have been met. The third thing I would say is if your primary care physician doesn't listen, then you need to find another one.
Absolutely.
But I think it's working with your primary care physician that opens this way to getting early detection, which really improves the outcome of treatment.
Absolutely. I think the important thing is if your primary care physician is not showing the kind of concern that he or she needs to show for this issue, that you need a new PCP, because it is a critical issue that often isn't on the forefront of many non-African American primary care physicians, but on the forefront of all physicians itself. So that's a critical thought for people of color. Dr. Tuckson, there's this conception that if you smoke, then you are at a higher risk, or at risk in general, for lung cancer, which of course we know is true. But is there any risk for people who have never smoked, those who have never touched a cigarette at all? Are they at risk, or are they home free from this disease?
Thank you very much. Because that's a question that's often asked when someone who doesn't have a history of smoking shows up with lung cancer. The answer is yes, there's still a risk, albeit a significantly lower risk. But who are the people that are highest risk who are non-smokers for lung cancer? Number one, there's the radon exposure. That is a significant problem. And for those of you who have never tested for radon, I encourage you to talk to your Department of Health or call the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, because there are a lot of radon home test kits that can be obtained, oftentimes for free. And if you've never done it, please, by all means, do testing for radon. So that's number one. Two, there is this thing, and again, during arguments about do we have smoke-free areas or no smoke-free areas, secondhand cigarette smoke is a significant problem. And it is not something to scoff at. I know in Kentucky we had this issue, well, maybe we should still continue to have areas of smoking and non-smoking in the same facility. Well, the best answer to that as far as effectiveness, are we going to have swimming pools where you have a urinating in section and a non-urinating section? The answer is no. Clearly, there's going to be stuff that's going to travel back and forth. And then the third hand is that third-hand cigarette smoke. Again, we don't think about it, but let's face it. I'm sure Dr. Sanders will tell you, somebody who's a cigarette smoker coming into the office don't have to ask the question, because we can smell it. You can smell it. It's on the clothes. Well, if it's on your clothes, it's going to be on your furniture at home. If it's on the furniture at home, it's going to be on the rugs and the curtains. And where are little babies and all that sort of thing crawling around? They're crawling around, they're touching stuff, and the first thing they do is go to the mouth. So they're ingesting a lot of these carcinogenic agents. So this is how, and then the final thing again, I harped on it a little bit, air pollution. Please do not minimize the impact of these pollutants to which we're being exposed. They can both exacerbate cigarette smoking and, in amongst themselves, can give rise to lung cancer.
Absolutely, absolutely. Insightful, insightful. Either one of you, Dr. Sanders particularly, but certainly Dr. Tuckson as well. So since there are issues that can cause lung cancer outside of smoking, and you mentioned a few of them, what can we do to empower our communities to ask their PCPs, refer them for lung cancer screening, empowering our communities to have this conversation with their primary care physicians, even though they don't necessarily have signs or symptoms? How can we empower them to start the conversation with their primary care?
Well, I think what you're doing here today is really a step in the right direction, and that is providing good, clear, crisp information for people to make decisions. And my sense is, and it goes back to what I said earlier, if you have a concern, discuss it with your primary care physician. And let's move to the next level for screening, if indeed you really have a concern. So I really believe that the relationship with the primary care physician is important. But I don't want to lose sight of the things that we as people need to make sure are taking place in our neighborhoods and communities where we live. And that is looking at this issue of air pollution, looking at issues of smoking in open spaces, looking at this idea of particularly this third-hand smoke, because this is a chronic problem of exposure that can lead to something that doesn't occur, that you may have been exposed to from, say, 5 until 15. The outcome doesn't manifest itself until 50 to 60. So I think beginning to think about all of these things and communicating with your primary care physician is the most important thing. But there's some things that you can do as well. First of all, there's primary prevention that fits all of this, and that is if you smoke, quit. If you drink alcohol, do it in moderation. Moderate use of alcohol. If you look at what you eat, if there's not a lot of color on your plate, you need to think about it twice. The more fruits and vegetables, the more it protects you over the long run. Regular exercise are the things that really add, that each of us can do to help with primary prevention. It not only helps with lung cancer, but it helps with a wide range of other conditions and diseases that impact us disproportionately as African American people. I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely.
Can I ask
Absolutely.
one question?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Where do we stand now as far as when a patient comes in? Because the thing about smoking is the nicotine. It is so darn addictive.
Right.
So where are we as far as coverage for patients getting on some of these agents like Chantix or going on for behavioral therapy, as far as getting it covered so they can come off?
Well, I think it really depends on the insurance company, but I do believe that most insurance companies will cover these medications that help people come off smoking, and even down to Medicaid providing that coverage. So I would say I think coverage is fairly good. Some of these medicines can be quite expensive.
Why is there such a big disparity between African American communities and non-African American communities when it comes to issues like lung cancer and some other cancers we've talked about? But the disparities seem to pop up every conversation we have. There is this disparity. Why does that exist? And what can we do to mitigate it? And Dr. Tuckson, Dr. Sanders,
I'll
both. Yes.
come back.
I'll give the fluff answer, and Dr. Sanders will give the meat. I think, and the first thing we have to be very careful about is that we don't blame the victim, by no stretch of the imagination. When we look at various diseases, we know that if you look at lung cancer, who is the population that has increased risk for developing of lung cancer? Tends to be folks at the lower end of the social economic scale and minority populations. Because for one reason or another, either A, we did not get the message, or B, we have not believed the message that there is association. We have done and we have accepted as normal many behaviors which are not, which are detrimental to our lifestyle. In the case of things like colon cancer, for instance, look at our dietary patterns. And we know that colon cancer is directly related to dietary things. And the foods that are available oftentimes in certain neighborhoods is different than it is in other areas. But the higher up one goes as far as education and income, we tend to find that some of the behaviors associated with some of these cancers. Now, the other thing, too, is availability of healthcare providers. I don't know how many of you all, most people are looking out here are probably a little too young to remember a TV show called Cheers, but the TV show had a tagline where everybody knows your name. And let's face it, when we go into a physician's office, we want to see somebody that looks, talks, walks, and feels like us. And so that we don't have to sit down and start explaining ourselves about who we are, the African American culture. Not saying that white doctors don't understand, please don't misunderstand. But sometimes there's that barrier that we can get across when someone that looks like us. And they may be a little more empathetic to some of the things or understand some of the things that are going on. So access to good quality health care, someone who is not pushing us through, you know, I saw a sign down here, I was walking not far from my hotel last night. He said, come in, you're not a patient, you are a person to us. And I think that's very important because as we look at how we are now, not at Emory, of course, not at Grady, but many other places, you know, sometimes we're even calling patients clients, and we're getting them in and out very quickly, and we're not spending time understanding the dynamics of their illnesses and the impact that it may have. And so this may lead to people coming in to see us and talking about it and being comfortable with our recommendations.
Very good answer. Thank you. Very good answer. Dr. Sanders.
No, I would just pick up one more time. I believe that communication between an individual and their primary care physician or primary care provider, if you don't use a physician, use a nurse practitioner, is really important. And I'd pick up on the idea that it is about communication, and sometimes communicating with somebody who looks like you helps with the understanding of the things that you don't say, if that makes any sense. It is that conversation and being able to, one, use the knowledge that I've gained through education to really connect and share that knowledge with you and to make a plan. But I want to go back to this thing about disparities and health equity. We talk about it a lot today, but it's not new.
Right.
It's not new. We can go back to 1984 when the federal government, for the first time, published information about disparities between African Americans and non-African Americans and what the potential years of life lost were by each disease. But we can even go back further than that. Because at the turn of century in Philadelphia, W.E.B. Du Bois published the Philadelphia Negro, and a whole section of that book is about disparities in health based on where you lived in Philadelphia. And a lot of what has to do with disparities really does connect to where we live, grow, work, worship, play, and serve. And that has a lot to do with disparities. I think you made a good analogy of the disparities in exposure to pollutants. If you think about it, it's more likely that a waste site would be built in a low-income African-American neighborhood than in a high-income neighborhood. If you think about sidewalks, you think about access to healthy food, you think about access to healthy or to sound education that then helps you take advantage of opportunities. So I think we really have to look at disparities through multiple lenses. Clearly, there is the lens of seeing your physician and getting those things taken care of early. There's the lens of primary prevention, but there's also the lens of what happens where we live, work, play, grow up, get educated. And those things are called the social determinants of health. They go back probably 20, 30 years. And I think it's where all of us come together. The politicians who divide up the money, those of us who help build the infrastructure in our neighborhoods and communities, have to come together to create the best opportunity for everybody in every neighborhood to be healthy. And I think that's how we bring about an end to disparities. It's right now very popular because there are two things that came out of COVID. One, COVID made disparities transparent.
Brought it to the forefront.
It brought it to the forefront.
Yeah.
It put a light on the disparities. There was no denying it. But it also heightened a degree of tension among races with the number of events that we had over and over again. So you put those two things together. So now we're having these discussions everywhere about health equity and about disparities. But I think we have to take it back to the neighborhood level if we're really going to make a change for those who come after us.
Massively enlightening. I think that the conversation needs to continue, that we need to not only have it in venues and forums like this, but we need to have these conversations at our dinner tables. We need to have them with our politicians, our elected officials. When we vote, we need to vote in connection to these ideas and these conversations, because policy impacts life, and communities impact life, neighborhoods impact life, where a waste site is being dumped, if we're having sidewalks installed in our community, if we are doing a lot of construction or industrialization, as Dr. Tuckson mentioned, that's happening over on the west side in these low-income communities. All of this impacts greatly how the quality of our life is either improved or diminished. And these cancers and other diseases are direct reflections of those. Our time for this panel is up, but I want to allow for someone from the audience to ask a question. So here's what you got to do. We got just a couple minutes left. I've got my timer here in front of me, and it says we're done. If you know you have a good question, it's got to be a good one. You know you have a good question. I want you to please come up to the microphone that is right up here at the stage. It's right down here at the stage. If you would please get up and come to the microphone and ask that good question that you have of either Dr. Tuckson or Dr. Sandberg. Sanders, and either of them will be happy to answer your question. And we only have time for one. I apologize. Only time for one because this panel is ended. I know. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Catherine. I'm an eight-year cancer survivor, breast cancer.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I wanted to know, by me being a former cancer patient or having cancer, does that make me susceptible to lung cancer and the other cancer since I've had cancer once? Am I susceptible to getting lung cancer and, you know?
First off, congratulations, Ms. Catherine. I'm glad to hear that you are an 8-year survivor, and I hope that you're continuing getting your mammograms on a regular basis and all that. Very, very good. The short answer is the development of lung cancer and breast cancer through different mechanisms. If we think about what other cancers you may or may not be at increased risk for developing, you might think about ovarian cancer, colon cancer, are the two biggest things that are coming along. Also, there's some chances of some others. Given that you're a young woman, your family members may be at increased risk for development of, and they should be screened for ovarian, breast, men, prostate, everybody, colon and rectal also. So looking at those, because they tend to run together. There's certain genetic predisposition associated with those. But in terms of directly answering your question, lung cancer associated with the breast cancer, to my knowledge, no, you're not at an increased risk for lung cancer because of breast cancer.
And the only thing I would say, it would also depend on the risk factors that you're exposed to. And I think the most important thing, first, I also want to just acknowledge your 8-year survival and your commitment to that process. And I think continuing to, one, work with your physicians to pay attention is the best thing that can happen.
Okay, now if you're also a diabetic or have any other chronic illness, does that make you susceptible? I'm also a diabetic. I have high blood pressure.
For the benefit of those who can't hear, if you're a diabetic or have other like concerns, does that make you more susceptible to cancers than others if you are a survivor?
Well, I think that I don't want to say that there is a direct correlation, but some of the factors that contribute to developing diabetes and hypertension are also can put you at risk for cancer as well. But my sense is as long as you do the things that you need to do to address those conditions and to prevent complications from those conditions, you improve the chances that you'll have a very healthy life.
And I must add one thing. I'm not going to ask you how you were treated, but for individuals who have been treated with radiation in the past, that does increase your risk for developing a lung cancer, unfortunately, but it is way down the road. The radiation, like so many things, has good and a bad associated with them because of the dosing, because you're radiating one particular area. Though they do a lot to try to make sure only where the breast cancer is located, but that does slightly increase. Exposure to radiation does increase people's risk of lung cancer, and radiation associated with treatment of other diseases in that chest area can be, but it's just something that needs to be looked at, that's all.
Allow me to apologize. I said that we had only time for one, and I misread my cue. So we have time for more. I apologize. So this gentleman that was here, he wants to come down and ask the doctors.
How you doing, Doc? My name's James Williams. I want to go back like 50 years back, because I was raised up in Birmingham, Alabama, and they had all these factories. You remember when they had the class soup for black lung? Do that cause, can spread without the whole body as far as lung cancer? And do lung cancer can cause you to get tuberculosis too?
Repeat the question, Dr.
Yeah, the question was in association with exposure to pollutants, but also with coal and coal dust, talking about black lung disease, and whether or not these things can also be associated with increased risk for development of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is a disease, and Dr. Sanders will correct me, is an infectious disease, but there are things that can decrease the body's response to itself responding to the bacterium. In particularly some particulate matter, again, some of the things you may be exposed to, but I'll leave that to Dr. Sanders to get into more detail. But to answer your question, clearly, people who have exposure, have black lung, pneumosilicosis, if I remember correctly, they have an increased risk for development of lung cancer. Two reasons. One, because of the coal dust itself, and number two, because of the cigarette smoking, without a doubt. And we're finding that minors have some of the highest incidences of lung cancer compared to anybody else because of those two things. Unfortunately, when we look at legislation addressing black lung disease and how we make the diagnosis, it has been changed so much over time that it's almost like it's trying to make what the patient has to go through in order to prove that they've got black lung because it's been changed, and to show that their disability is related to that and the smoking. It's a really, really big hurdle. But the short answer to your question, as I think they use in the courts of law, preponderance of evidence to the average layperson, absolutely there is an association. So anybody who has been that exposure needs to stop smoking. And that's one of those things. And let me point out something else to you. So you talked about other people who are exposed to that. When we talk about exposure, the impact of exposure to agents that can give rise to development of cancer, in this case we're talking about lung cancer, but other things, when we talked about women, you see the impact of exposure to a lot of pollutants, not necessarily in the generation of the woman who's alive, but in the next generation after that, the grandchild. Because when the ovaries are undergoing development, where the egg is going to be in there, that is when damage to that egg is going to take place. So you may find the woman who's exposed to the pollutants living up in the mountains, her daughter may be fine, but the granddaughter or grandson may come back with some particular problem. So this is a multi-generational problem of which you're speaking of, and yes, it is a bad problem.
And the thing I would say is that that's a important thing to talk with your primary care physician about, because I think that opens the door to getting screened. And I would say that's a risk factor that would need to lead you to getting screened.
Yeah, because, see, I'm saying they had a class action suit, and we won it. You know, my father had a lot of people in the neighborhood, that women that didn't smoke, you know, and then work in the factory. It was the pollutants that came, that was burning.
Right.
And, you know, that's how a lot of people got black lung. My father had tuberculosis, and I myself had to take medication for a year. You know, but if I take a skin test, it's gonna show positive, but I don't have the disease.
Thank you so much for that question and for that insight. Thank you. Question on this far side here.
Can either of you explain the negative effects of hookah smoking?
Repeat that question again.
Can either of you explain the negative effects of hookah smoking?
That's a tough question. And I think any smoking is bad. But, and I don't want to say that having filters on cigarettes makes it any better. But I think that the concept of just raw smoke is a problem. So I think any smoking is bad. Tobacco smoking is bad, and I think that's what hookah is. I'm showing my age because I really don't know a whole lot about it. I see the things, but and I've talked to a few patients, but I try to discourage it.
Yeah, and I think there's another problem with hookah smoking, is if you look at the duration of which someone is smoking, they tend to smoke for about an hour. And in the course of that hour, probably consuming the contents of 1 pack of cigarettes.
Right.
So where someone may say, well, I'm not directly puffing in, no. You're getting not the nicotine, which not necessarily, though there are some studies that show some increased risk alone, just nicotine alone for cancer, but all the other stuff that's going along with it too. So yeah, it's bad. I agree, no smoking is safe. You can't put lipstick on a pig.
Right.
Really
And my sense is with hookah smoking, you got both secondhand smoke, firsthand smoke, and third-hand smoke.
all in one. I
all
think
in one place.
it needs to be mentioned as well that the target for hookah smoking is a much lower age demographic. So even if the dangers are not the same as a cigarette, you're introducing a 13, 14-year-old to this process, which could easily lead into full cigarette smoking in their early 20s.
I couldn't
so
agree with you more.
it's the target, the commercial target is also a problem.
Right.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good morning. This is right up my alley because 3 months ago I had a heart attack and I was a heavy smoker and I had to change my whole lifestyle. So I guess my question is, how do I better help myself more? Where I changed my eating, I changed my, I changed my diet, I got the patch, like you said, what I found important too was with my primary care. I didn't have the right primary care. I had a primary care that didn't care about me. So how do I better help myself now?
Let me repeat that question. So, a gentleman just had a heart attack just a few months ago and is now trying to make some healthy life choices and changes in his lifestyle and trying to find out how can he better that lifestyle to prevent, obviously, cancers and other health challenges in the future.
I'm going to start with where you talked about your primary care physician. Okay. And I think the first thing that I heard was that you had a primary care physician who didn't care. Correct. You know, one of the most important things I think I learned in medical school, in an odd way, not from a book, but just from listening to one of my teachers, and his comment was at the time that the best way to care for a patient is to care about them. So you really have to identify that communication, and I think it's very important now that you stay connected to a good primary care physician. I think you talked about already, I'm going to make sure that you've already quit smoking.
Yeah,
And,
I didn't quit. Believe I'm in the process.
I got to speed that along.
Yeah.
You changed your diet. I think the challenge in front of us, and I think we're doing pretty well, is that we've got to make soul food healthy food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the ways I often describe that is that we'll fry chicken and we'll eat it, but we won't pour the grease down the drain, if that makes any sense. But we'll eat it and put it in our veins. So we really have to begin to think about our diets and really begin to make the food taste good. And there's a whole new emerging trend around the importance of nutrition and translating that into how we eat. So I think you've done those things, and I think with the guidance of your primary care physician, I would think about some regular exercise program, but clearly with the guidance of your primary care physician. And then just taking account the other things, responsible use of alcohol, and just responsible behavior as an individual. So I think those are the important things from the individual perspective. I hope that helped.
And it's, you know, we can't get mad at a person who has a cold who continues to cough.
Right.
So we're not going to chastise you for not totally giving it up. But let's face it, that whole industry was built around getting you to smoke. And nicotine is one of the most addictive substances that's out there. Yeah, and when we think about smoking is associated with about 48% of mortality in the United States from heart disease, not only lung cancer, several different cancers. So you got all kinds of things with cigarettes are associated with. So it is a bad thing. But I do want to stress one thing Dr. Sanders said earlier, is look at the color of your plate. It should be colorful. Look for the fruits and vegetables that we're all taking in. The great thing about fruits and vegetables is that you have things that help prevent certain carcinogens, pre-carcinogens from manifesting themselves in certain things that are cancers. It helps break those down so they're not effective. And I will say, and it's probably an anthem in a building such as this, we cook greens too long and put too much fat in the greens. I mean, I'm sorry, but we got to alter that.
Right.
I'd love them too, but they're not supposed to come out mushy.
Right.
All the good stuff is gone
Right.
at that point. But again, dietary modifications are a thing. And looking at, to make it simple, 5 servings of fruits and or vegetables a day and put the cigarettes down.
Right. And I do want to pick up on this idea about the environment around cigarette smoking. It wasn't too long ago that people had a smoking section on airplanes.
Yeah.
It wasn't too long ago that we had television ads about cigarettes. It wasn't too long ago that we created the idea that if you didn't smoke, something was wrong with you. It wasn't cool. So I think in dealing with all of those things, you see then the effect of decisions made outside of you on your individual behavior. So I can't say that it is very hard, but it's something you got to keep working toward.
Real quick for the pastor.
Yes.
You were saying,
Speaking to the mic.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You were saying, I had a hard time with my health coverage finding the path to quit smoking or my coverage to cover
Okay.
what it costs. But I found a way through my wife with dedication and research. Georgia State runs a program, and they'll pay you. But not only that, it was a point of where that's the only thing I needed to do. I quit. I changed my diet around. I went to cardiac rehab. I completed an 8-month program. I had to quit smoking because I was going to die. And that's how I found out, like you said, through research. So I just wanted to enlighten you today.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Not a question, but a great comment that speaks about the importance of research in your own health care. You are your first doctor. You are your first doctor.
Very true.
Research, study helps with your health care. Last question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
And if
Hi,
you could,
doctor.
hold
I'm
on
from
1
Louisville,
second.
too.
We're going to bring that down right there.
I have diabetes and I have some health problems, but sometimes I can't breathe. But I tell my sister, you know, she starts smoking, I put a mask on. But I've always had a mask before the pandemic. I'm trying to figure out why I was wearing a mask because I couldn't hardly breathe. I think it was just the air or something. I don't know. It wasn't much pollen in Kentucky, but I just had to wear a mask before mask was even worn. And I lived in California, and I was spitting up blood, and I didn't know why. And I didn't know why, and it carried on for a while, and I just forgot about it, started praying about it, and it stopped. But I thought I had an ulcer, and I'm thankful that you guys is here, and I know a lot about what's going on, and I will go and tell my doctor to send me to the lung research center.
Very
Did
good.
everybody hear that question? My sister was just simply saying that she's had some of the symptoms that Dr. Tuckson and Dr. Sanders have mentioned today, and she's been wearing a mask prior to, COVID, having some breathing issues. And now, as a result of this conversation, she's going to talk with her primary care doctor regarding that, and I think that's extremely brave. If I could have Dr. Sanders and Dr. Tuckson to just give us some closing remarks for this panel, and then we'll start our next one.
I just close by saying thank you for allowing me to share what I know with you. It's always a pleasure. I would actually say that the best thing you can do is primary prevention. If you smoke, quit smoking. Look at your plate. The more color, the better. Work toward making soul food healthy food. Work with your children in terms of the amount of salt that you ingest. I would try to get some regular exercise. And I'd add one more thing, and I think because we live here in DeKalb County, I think it's important that you get your home tested for radon. Although it's not a mountainous area, we do have these granite outcroppings
Yes.
called Stone Mountain and Arabia Mountain.
That's right.
And they trap patches of radon that can get into homes. And I think that the EPA here in DeKalb is very proactive about working with you. So that would be the one thing that I would kind of say, because of where we live, it's important.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Dr. Tuckson.
I would just say, first of all, Pastor Harris, again, I want to compliment you and your church and the members and others who are here, because this is the beginning of the whole process. I'm not going to say what Dr. Sanders already said. All I ask is that as Reverend Harris is having us here to amplify his voice, and that you take this home to your family members, to your people who live next door to you, and to the folks on your block, to do the right thing when it comes to cigarette smoking, stop, and getting screening for lung cancer. Thank you very much for the privilege of being here, and for you all being here and listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Please give both of these gentlemen a strong, strong hand. One of the statements that stood out to me is, if you won't pour it down the drain, you shouldn't pour it down your belly. I love that. I love that. Well, give them a hand one more time, please. Well, I want to move quickly to our next panel, and our next panel is going to be patient navigation and care, talking about patient care, speaking about patients and survivors. And this panel is very important for me because my mother-in-law passed away from lung cancer, and caring for her was one of the most challenging aspects of my family's life. And so please listen carefully to what's being shared in this panel. Minister Sabrina Botts is going to be our host, and she's going to come. Please give her a very, very strong, strong hand.
Thank you, Pastor. Hey, y'all. Good to see everybody. We're going to bring our panelists on. Ladies, you can have a seat. And as they're coming to our audience, I want you guys to give yourselves a hand. You all look amazing, but I just want to celebrate your decision to come and be in a place where you can get the information that you need for yourselves. So give yourselves a hand one more time. All righty. And let's give our first panel a hand as well. Pastor Harris and these doctors did a great job of communicating some very technical information, but in a simplified way. So I was very appreciative to that. I hope you all learned a lot and you gleaned some nuggets that you're going to be able to take away with you. Well, as we get started, I want to introduce you to our very special guests and tell you a little bit about what this panel is slated to be. We're here to talk about patient navigation and care, and particularly looking at early detection, screening, and what that looks like for patients. How do you navigate? And maybe we'll get to a definition of what navigation is. You all know it because you have to do it. But we want to talk about some of the technical things that can happen between a patient being diagnosed with something and what does it mean to walk it out. I used to tell my patients that it's up to you to let me know what doesn't work for you. Because when you leave me, you got to go and live it out. And that's what navigation really is. So we hope to bring some dialogue that will help you arm yourselves, not only with lung health, but maybe some other areas of health that you need as well. So why don't we get started first by introductions, because I'm a good Southern girl, and so we need to make sure we know who's in the room. So first we have Nurse Julia, Miss Julia Eze. Did I say it right? You did. All right, awesome. Julia is a nurse. She's also a nurse practitioner. And she's Atlanta-based, board-certified family nurse practitioner that has a passion for health promotion and disease prevention. She has more than 10 years of experience in her industry, and she shares her extensive knowledge on health and wellness in 3 ways: as a creator, a consultant, and a health media expert. For her contributions in nursing, she's been recognized by the Daisy Foundation. If you guys have ever been in a hospital, you see these little photos on the walls with a little flower. That's an award that's given to nurses that are excellent. And we all know that nurses really make the difference. If you ever have to be in a hospital, thank the Lord for nurses. So Julia has received this Daisy Foundation Award. And then away from the bedside, she's revered for founding the Nurse Link, which is a social enterprise that connects current, future, and aspiring nurses to mentorship, scholarship, and networking. So let's give Julia a hand. All right. And then we have Miss Ursula Mathis-Dennis, who is the Director of Quality and Comprehensive Services for the Oncology Service. And oncology is just a fancy word for cancer, y'all. And she's at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital, which is in Albany. She's a servant leader and a healthcare advocate for women's health, community outreach, and healthcare equality and disparities. And I do want to put a pin in that. We use that word disparities a lot in the last panel, and I want to have Ursula, when you do have your time, let's talk about what disparities are, because we hear those terms a lot, but everyone may not know what that really means, as well as this whole idea of inequities, so that everybody is on the same page and understanding what we mean. Okay. But a little bit more about Ursula is that her mission is to break down those healthcare disparities and barriers, as she truly believes that everyone is deserving of quality healthcare. Let the church say amen. All right. So with that said, we're going to welcome this lady. Let's give Miss Ursula a hand. All righty. So what we wanted to do is really have a discussion. We know that for most of us, having these conversations is not only what we want you to learn how to do, but we glean a lot of stuff from talking, y'all. We gain a lot of stuff. So that's what we hope to do. As we're talking, there are going to be questions that come up for you. So kind of write them down or stick a pen, put them someplace. We're going to have a Q&A session. So I want you to just catch them as they come, because y'all know how sometimes they'll come up and then you'll forget by the time it comes around. So, okay. So we want to get started. And I thought of all kinds of ways to get this started. We talked a lot about prevention. We talked about early detection. And so I want for you to start with us, Nurse Julia, to bring us back or maybe summarize this whole idea of prevention. We heard quite a few things. So if you could just give us maybe 2 or 3 things that we want people to take away with them. How do we prevent, or what kinds of things should we be doing to prevent lung cancer and other cancers?
Gotcha. So the first panel did a really great job of laying out some really helpful tips, but just to reiterate, obviously stopping smoking is going to be the big one. There are estimated to be about 7,000 toxins in cigarette smoke, so that should be enough reasons to stop smoking. Obviously, we know the risk of second and third hand smoke, along the lines of prevention as well, I think. More so looking at your body as a temple, you know, like the gentleman before said, what are you putting in your body as it relates to your diet? You know, how are you moving your temple? Lots of recommendations exist out there, but I think 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise is a great place to start to get your body moving on a daily basis. Advocating for yourself, getting comfortable asking questions is huge when it comes to prevention, just as much as going to see your PCP provider. I think the more that you get comfortable seeing someone, the more it increases the chance that something that you might not even be there for can be picked up. So that's also important. But really taking some initiative. You know, I think to a large degree, our health and wellness lies on us, and I'm hopeful that we all will do a better job of advocating for ourselves and being intentional when it comes to our health, whether that be going to visits and doing the things that your providers are asking you to do. I see patients every day who don't know why they're taking medications or how they're taking the medications. They just are taking them, and sometimes they're not taking them. But I think we have to do a better job of really owning our health. And I think all those things contribute to prevention.
So one of the things I definitely hear you saying is us owning our lives. How many of you wish you had known that information years ago? We say hindsight is 20/20. Yes, it is. But whenever we learn new stuff, we can always start today. And sometimes when you look at things that are new, I know for me and my perspective, they can feel very hard. Because all these years I've been doing this, and now you're telling me that I got to do this. But most of you, as I look at you, and some of you, many of you I know, you've done other hard stuff. So just take a moment and look back over your life. There have been things that you've had to face that were hard. And so making lifestyle changes can be hard, but hard does not equal impossible. And so I think it starts with us having that mindset of knowing that we can do it. Now, most of us, or sometimes for us, we figure out we can do when we have to. And what we want to do with prevention is we want to make that choice to do it before we get to a do or die kind of situation. So, All righty. Well, I want to bring Miss Ursula into the conversation, and I had a good question for you, so let me pull this out. So we talked about early detection. That came up in the first panel, and they talked about the low-dose CT. So say a person has come in, they've gotten screened, or hearing just this whole idea about getting a CT scan. Can you give us some information about what that test is like? It sounds kind of scary. I know that some people, when they hear CT, you don't know if you have to get the dye or not. Are you going in this tube? Am I going to die? Are they going to choke me? Like, what is that kind of screening test like?
That's a good question. And the low-dose CT scan is actually a very simple, non-invasive test. There's no dye included for this particular exam or this particular test. It takes about 15 minutes. You lay on the table, and it scans you in thin slices. And so it's a relatively easy test. There are other levels to the exam for if the test comes back and we have to do a diagnostic exam, or sometimes if your physician orders it for other reasons, and that does include diaphragm. But this particular reason for screening for low-dose CT scans is a very non-invasive, simple test.
And that reminds me, we probably should re-emphasize who needs to get screening. So we know that there are different recommendations whether you are symptomatic or not. So if you're asymptomatic, can you remind the audience who should be screened if you have no symptoms at all?
So based on national guidelines, asymptomatic meaning no symptoms, individuals 50 to 80 years of age, 20-pack-year smoker that currently smoke or did quit smoking and have a 20-year pack-year smoke.
Okay. And can you break down how do we calculate these packs? Because that can get confusing. What if I smoke a half a pack of cigarettes and not a whole pack? Or if I just smoke 3? No, I'm just kidding.
So the 20-year packs here is that if you smoked a pack of cigarettes for 20 years, or you smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for the last 10 years, usually that's how they calculate the 20-year pack. Most people, say I smoke a pack of cigarettes, I smoke a half a pack of cigarettes. If you've smoked, period, for the last 20 years, you need to have a CT scan. You need to be screened. Don't make it complicated. Let's try to just keep it as simple as possible. If you have a 10, 15, 20-year history that you have smoked nicotine products, you're eligible if you're in that age range for a CT scan.
And Nurse Julia, I just wanted to bring you into the conversation. I think it came up in this last session about everybody's not smoking cigarettes right now. So cigarettes can be kind of passé. It's for probably a certain patient population. There are different things that people are smoking these days. So is there something that you can add about who should be paying attention to, whether or not they should be screening or even maybe watching themselves for some kinds of symptoms of lung cancer for people who are non-cigarette smokers?
I think everyone should be watching themselves. It seems like smoking is such a big thing in some capacity, whether it's cigarette smoking. I think we were having a conversation the other day about the trends in smoking, and someone asked a question even about hookah, but there's so many forms of smoke now outside of cigarette smoke, vaping and e-cigarettes and all kinds of things. And I think, honestly, the big push should be that we should all be mindful of the smoke around us or the air pollutants around us, smokers or not, because at this point, it seems almost inevitable that you would come in contact with it. Yeah. And I think that's evidenced by non-smokers having lung cancer.
Yeah. Go ahead.
If I can echo that, as you said, it's just trendy in our population. It's just trendy in our demographics, and especially with some of our young people, the vaping, the smoking, the hookahs. I mean, it's how they party. It's when you go out. There's cigar bars in every neighborhood now, and that's for an older generation, the population of people, so we can't blame it on the young people or on the kids. There's a hookah lounge in every club scene, So I think we have to educate so that people can make informed decisions. I think that hookah and vaping is sort of new, so we don't know what type of long-term effects it's going to have, but we know the effects of smoking in general. And so I think we have to keep that education to the forefront. I think we can't be accusatory in your actions, but you have to ask people to make informed decisions. It's what we do and how we do it in moderation. And it's also that what we do after that. You know, we can't smoke every night, eat bad, lay on the couch, don't exercise. You have to be conscious about your lifestyle and your decisions and your choices of what you choose to do. Everybody have their own vices. Some people are going to smoke cigars and they're never going to smoke cigars, but they may work out 5 days a week. They're watching their diet. They're doing different things to try to combat some of their behaviors and their choices. So I think that we have to control our habits and not let our habits control us.
Oh, that's so well said. I think it's also important when we start to look at lifestyle changes, you don't want to just do something. Y'all know, like, if any of y'all are in a church, what do we do every January? We fast. And so in January, we go hard. We're not eating candy. We're not eating sugar. We're not drinking coffee. We're not doing a whole bunch of stuff. What happens on February 1st? We go right back
We treat ourselves.
to doing the same. That's right. We reward ourselves for all that
ourselves.
discipline and denial that we had. And I think that it's not just in our community. I think it's the nature of us being humans. We like to do what we like to do. And so lifestyle changes that will support our health have to be things that we're going to have for the long term. And that's ugly, it's dirty, it's hard. We don't like to hear that. But it's just the truth. But with that said, that means that you've got to do it in a way that works for you. Because you may not be able to go hard like I go. Because if you do it for the week with me, the second week, you're going to go back to doing it. And so that's a part of the recommendations that we offer. And even when you're with your doctor, we want to help to empower you, this whole idea of negotiation. Because at the end of the day, it's your life. You're the one that's got to walk it out. And so we want you to be able to get to the point where you can take the information you're receiving and translate it into something that's workable. And I know that you ladies would invite your patients to have these conversations. Nurse Julia, we had a conversation before we started about that very thing.
Exactly. I think that small, moderate changes done consistently stand to make the greatest impact. Because to your point, you know, doing things abruptly or for a short amount of time, they may serve their purpose in the moment, but long term, I think, you know, lifestyle changes have to be reasonable. And so, you know, if you know that you aren't going to give up the pork, then looking at eating the pork a couple of times a day as opposed to every day might be a win-win for you, you know? So yeah, I think small, consistent changes stand to make the greatest impact.
Definitely. We have to learn to meet people where they are. And we have to encourage people to meet themselves in honesty where they are. You don't have to, when I have these conversations, you don't really even have to tell me where you are, but I want to give you the tools so that you can meet yourself where you are and make moderate changes to change that behavior. There's no judgment on my part. I just want to make you aware of the consequences of where you're headed so that we can divert that mission and that you can meet yourself where you are. If that means a chair exercise every day, you've exceeded yourself from yesterday. And that's how I try to encourage people that just go a step further. You don't have to make drastic changes, but one change leads to the next change, leads to the next change. We are consumers. And so they market that weakness in us as a people, that we are just consumers. That's in fashion, that's in clothing, that's in alcohol, that's in nicotine, that's in everything. We're consumers. So that you have to combat that and that desire because we like the fulfillment of it. So we have to find fulfillment in other things.
And in truth, many people are navigating lots of hard stuff. And so you get to the point where you don't want to do another hard thing, you know. And many things in our environment, particularly in minority communities, for instance, if I'm getting off work late, I got a couple of kids I got to pick up from after school, I'm tired, I don't have a lot of money. Between I-20 and when I get down to the Wells Fargo, so not even all the way down Flat Shores Parkway, I would have passed about 5 or 6 fast food restaurants. That's working against me trying to eat healthy. It just is. It makes it harder. And so I think it is important for us to be aware of the things that are in our environment and that sort of work against you. And then that way you can make those informed choices that you can do. Another thing that can work is setting realistic goals. If you already know that Mother's Day is tomorrow and you're gonna have peach pie, red velvet cake, and then some banana pudding. Like, you already know that because y'all gonna have a potluck, you going to Big Mama's house, whatever. Don't get there and act like you're not gonna be tempted to eat nothing sweet. Do you see what I'm saying? So make your choices on the front end about things that are manageable for you, and that way you can start to have some success. Because remember, this is how you are living. It's not like on vacation where you're just gonna be here 2 weeks. This is the life you're navigating every day. So the key to making these long-term changes is being able to handle the life that you're in. Something else that you said I wanted us to bring back in the conversation is you talked about not fussing at patients or that kind of concept when they come to the doctor. One of the things that I'd like to bring out is this whole conversation about what y'all tell us. Now, I'm not gonna ask y'all to show y'all hands, but I know that many times patients don't tell their doctors the truth. Just raise your hand if that's true. Not of you, but just of other people. That people don't tell their doctors the truth. Is that a yes? Could I get an amen? A lot of times patients don't tell their doctors the truth. And I'd like to see, ladies, what kind of advice would you want to give to this audience about that, or how to navigate it, or what should be happening?
Well, it's a known fact that patients have white coat syndromes. Every patient in all demographics, all everything, patients have white coat syndromes. So, and that's why it's important that, especially with cancer diagnosis, you should always bring someone with you, because once you've been told you have cancer, statistics show that you retain about 5% of anything else that was said after they've told you that you've had a positive diagnosis. So you should always bring someone else to hear it. But even without it being cancer, patients kind of don't really want to hear it. So the response is, if he got something, he gonna find it in this tube of blood, because we think that when they draw one tube of blood, they're testing the whole canvas of any and everything that could possibly be wrong with you, and that's false. So it's like, if I don't tell him, if it's not in that blood, I'm good. Yeah. So we psych ourselves out before we ever get into the doctor's office. Then we have the white coat syndrome, so we're not gonna ask the hard questions. It's almost like we'd rather hear the soft truth than the hard truth. Yeah. So we have to just put it all on the table, but we got to be comfortable when we go in there to do so, to be able to just lay it all out, that I'm experiencing this, I had this happen a couple of weeks ago and it continues to happen, I have this pain, this is not happening and it should be happening. You have to be able to give the physician all of the facts in order for them to be able to make informed decisions on your behalf.
That's true.
It brings up what we also mentioned earlier when we were having this conversation about some of the barriers that would contribute to you guys maybe not feeling comfortable enough to share your whole truth as it relates to your health or how you've been eating or any concerns that you may have. And, without going down a rabbit hole too far, we talked about barriers such as representation, and I think that was mentioned a bit earlier, just that comfortability, being able to share what's happening. But I think that knowledge is power, and the more comfortable you get going to a provider, especially one that looks like you, then there are great opportunity to really voice all of your concerns and really take a charge of your health.
And that reminds me, I forgot to bring us back to start to talk about this whole idea of healthcare disparities. I think that not only not having providers that look like you and also that care about what is in your community helps to drive those disparities. So would you like to give us a simple definition of what a healthcare disparity is?
That's deep. That's it's a huge question, and it's a loaded question, because everyone's talking about healthcare disparities and health equity right now. And I think it's kind of like navigation. It looks a little different to everyone and everything. There are some brilliant scientists and minds in the world, and all of them don't look like us. Yeah. And some of them do look like us. There's a lot of them that does look like us. And we should have to look like you for you to be equitable to me. Yeah. Yeah. So disparities start when we have unconscious biases that we are greater than lesser, or we're deserving of greater or lesser because we don't look alike, because we don't worship the same, because we don't think alike, or because we come from different demographical backgrounds. That's where disparities and biases start, and the inequities in all of life kind of take place. So we come with an expectation, and we leave with one, and then when we get there, our providers, they have an expectation for us as well. But we have to raise the bar. We got to be able to advocate for ourselves and do our parts as well. But we are due equality. It's due to us. It's due to everyone. Everyone deserves equality in healthcare and fair healthcare.
Amen. One of the things that also should come out is that many times when you go to the doctor, thinking about some of the reasons that you may not feel comfortable to tell your doctor what's really happening with you, or really letting them know what's working for you or not. I know that if I ask for a show of hands, likely everybody's hands would go up, where you've gotten a recommendation from a doctor that you did not follow, or a medicine that you stopped taking and pretended like you did because you didn't like how it made you feel. You weren't sure about the instructions that you were supposed to carry out. You had questions that you didn't know where to take them. And all those things can cause what we call these disparities or these differences. When we look at disease processes, we look at some communities and they just tend to do better on their outcomes than what certain populations do. And there are all kinds of reasons that happens. Sometimes it happens because your healthcare provider assumes some things about you that may or may not be true. Like, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced interacting with a medical provider who treated you like you didn't have no sense, who treated you like you couldn't understand what they were saying, or they treated you with suspicion, or they treated you like you were, almost the enemy. And so that made you feel a certain type of way, and therefore you interacted with them and you reacted a certain kinds of way. So those kinds of biases and those kinds of interactions that can happen in our exam rooms, they happen at pharmacies, they happen when you're calling to make your appointment. And all of those things play into our health care. And I think what I don't want to do is beat the dead horse or make you feel, like the whole world is against you. I just simply want to name what is true and what you navigate. And all of that plays a role into how you experience health. But we want you to feel empowered, that you almost like you don't take it. You know what I mean? You do your part though. You've got to ask your questions. If they don't get answered, keep asking them. But you also need to be able to tell the truth. If you're not taking the medicine, then say why. If you don't understand the instructions, then even if it makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable, then say that, because what you don't understand may end up working against you.
Two of the biggest barriers in life of anything is fear and shame.
Yeah, that's good.
So sometimes we're fearful of what the outcomes could possibly be. And sometimes we're just ashamed of what it is, of how long we've taken to address it.
Yeah.
Or we're fearful of our family members knowing or anything. So those are barriers that we've got to break down. And sometimes it takes more than one visit to break that barrier down. Sometimes it takes a couple of visits for you to get comfortable enough to break down that barrier. And sometimes it's not broken down with the physician. Sometimes it's with that nurse navigator. Sometimes it's with another patient. But fear and shame are two of the biggest things that we see in healthcare. And it's for an abundance of reasons. But if we can get past the fear and the shame of where we are, we got to meet you where you are. We want it early. Screening and prevention works. We know that. But sometimes we meet you after that. So we have to meet you where you are and be able to address your issues and your concerns at that point.
Back to you. Nurse Julia, did you want to say something on that one?
I think the only thing that really stood out to me when you were saying that was the issue of compliance. I think a lot of the things that you said pointed to the patient's willingness to do what's been asked of them. And I think you guys drove it home pretty well. Yeah, I won't go any further on that.
I would say with compliance too, building that, the physician was saying that you have to get you a relationship with your primary care physician, and it's the same thing with your parents, with your pastors, with someone that you don't trust or respect, you're not necessarily gonna follow through with the recommendations. So that relationship is very important.
And And the onus is on your provider, but it's also on you as a patient, that if there are problems, just like with any relationship, if we don't work on the problem is just gonna be there, and many times it gets worse. So if things are happening, and that is your doctor, at least give it a try to resolve it. Or I don't feel like you're listening to me. Like I said this and you didn't listen, or I felt like you rushed me out, so there are things that can be named, that could be resolved. You can navigate them so that you can have a better working relationship with your care team. But speaking about navigation, because that is part of what this panel is about. So say a patient is diagnosed with lung cancer, say that worst comes, then what is the role of patient navigation and support in the community where a patient is?
I like to describe navigation as your GPS to the healthcare system or to your healthcare journey. Just like you have your Garmin GPSs, well, we probably don't have Garmins anymore. Everybody's car has a GPS.
It's on our phone now.
I'm telling my age. Everyone's car has a GPS in there. But it tells you how to get where you need and try to break down barriers. There's traffic over here, don't go that way. There's an accident up ahead. This may be a 10, 15-minute delay. So a navigator breaks down those barriers so the patients don't have to be involved with those stressors. Helps you get your appointments. It has all the bag lines and the bag numbers. It speaks with you about your social economics so that we can address whether you need some other services or whether you need transportation. Is that the reason why you're missing your appointments? Whether there's a problem with you getting your prescriptions. A lot of the background noise and information that you don't necessarily have the time or the withal to discuss when you're with your physician, the navigator helps connect all of those pieces. And there's various different type of navigators. There's, financial navigators, there's nurse navigators, there's lay navigators, but for the most part, the navigator should be helping you connect all the dots to your healthcare journey.
And helping you to navigate those barriers, because barriers come up in our lives all the time. I love that analogy when you talk about traffic, because you're clearly on your way someplace, but many things come up along that path that in order for you to get to your destination, that thing has got to be navigated. I got to go around it. I got to wait till it's over. And I think that's a good lesson in managing other healthcare needs, because not everybody sitting out here has lung issues or has lung cancer, but many people are navigating other chronic diseases like hypertension, like diabetes, or people are dealing with vision issues. And so all of those kinds of chronic healthcare issues, you have to walk those out every day. The cost of medication. There are times that if you get a new med, and even if your copay is only $10, well, if you're on a fixed income and you got an additional medicine, that just became something else you've got to have cash for. That is something that a patient navigator can help you to navigate.
Exactly. The cost of healthcare overall is astronomical. So a cancer journey is one of the leading causes of bankruptcy, and that is in a middle income class family. But what navigators also do is they identify resources. And we also know that statistically, those patients that have a greater support system with any type of disease, comorbidity, be it cancer, heart disease, and everything, have better prognosis, because support systems, be it family, be it your healthcare providers, be it your navigators, it helps your outcomes. So navigators also help you identify various resources in your community, in your organizations, in your facilities, in your healthcare organizations. So it identifies a lot of resources that are beneficial to the patients, to help the patients along the journey.
And many things come up that you don't even know you need. And so that is also important with you talking to your healthcare provider, because as things come up with you and your limited resources, you may not know what to do, but letting them know that you have a need can open your door to a solution that you didn't even know existed. So we're going to transition into a Q&A session, and if any of you have any questions, and you can come to the mic here and also to the mic here. But I do have at least one question to get us started. The panel before us talked a lot about screening and screening guidelines. We re-emphasized that. I know probably if I ask you to raise your hand, many of us were exposed to secondhand smoke growing up. In fact, depending upon your age, many of our mamas smoked when they was carrying us. You know, that's just how smoking was back in the day. So it's likely not anybody here that has not been exposed to smoke. And then now we know more than what we used to know. So can I be screened even if I don't meet these guidelines for screening?
Yes and no.
You said yes and no?
Yes and no. It will not, first of all, you have to talk to your primary care physicians, or you speak with your healthcare providers, and you tell them what you feel like your risk factors are, what your exposures were. If you're having any signs and symptoms, definitely that's considered a diagnostic. But for those that do not meet the screening guidelines, I know that legislation is working now to try to, because everybody don't fit into those guidelines. But that's a conversation you have with the hair care provider, because these tests can be ordered through the Affordable Care Act and different pairs. It's called preventive services. But the same test, the same low-dose CT scan can be ordered for shortness of breath, for any other symptoms that you may tell you have your primary care physician for. It's the exact same test.
And I know
it's just not called a low-dose CT screening for lung cancer.
And I know that probably for a lot of people here, when they were talking about some of the symptoms, we all thought about COVID and how when COVID was around, many people still are not back to 100%, particularly with their lung capacity or their lung stamina. And so I can imagine how that can just get confusing and concerning, because people could be thinking this is a residual from COVID and is really something else totally going on.
Well, COVID absolutely affected and attacked the respiratory system. There's no doubt about that. And those that had comorbidities suffered more than others.
Yeah.
And those comorbidities have heightened post-COVID once. But those are, again, conversations you have to have. That's why it's so important to have a healthcare home. That's why it's so important to have a primary care physicians, because they have your history. They can compare the progression of your disease. They know those tests that they need to order to get to see the progression of those diseases. So it's really important, the primary care physician piece in all of this. Screening and prevention is important, but your primary care is more important than anything, because you need a healthcare advocate in a healthcare home.
And I see that you have a question. I do want to ask these ladies before we get to you about smoking cessation, because that came up in the last session. And I just wanted to ask, and we hadn't talked about this, about smoking cessation resources here in the state of Georgia. Do you guys know of any programs that you can offer to the room and to what's online?
Not off the top of my head.
The state of Georgia has several quit programs. I know most of them, there's a couple in our local health department, so most of the health departments, if you want to check with your health departments, a lot of the institutions have grant-funded programs, but there's a lot of quit smoking programs that are out there locally and nationally.
Yeah, there's a national tobacco quit line, and the one for Georgia is called the Georgia Tobacco Quit Line. You can Google it, and what they do is there'll be counselors, because we know that anytime we need to make changes, we have to deal with our mindset. A lot of times, one of the physicians earlier talked about how addictive nicotine is, but also smoking is, for many of us, just like food. We associate it with many things. That's why it's so hard to change your eating, because eating is integrated into our lives. Well, for people who smoke or use other tobacco products, likely they're integrated into something else you do, whether that's stress management and or when you celebrate. So a part of your program of doing something different helps you to attack all those kinds of things. Because at the end of the day, if you're used to smoking every time you whatever, whenever you do that thing, you're going to want to smoke. So it helps you to decide what else are you going to do or how do you attack that. So I just wanted to bring that.
So true. Most of our habits start socially.
Yep, most of our habits start socially. Yes, ma'am. Come on to the microphone. Thank you. Tell us your name again.
Catherine.
Miss Catherine.
And I have a question in reference to, you said we don't tell all the doctors everything. And the reason being, half the time the doctors don't listen. For example, my doctor just recently retired. She was my doctor for 31 years, and she taught me well. I carry this everywhere I go. I have a list of my current medication. I have a list of all my surgeries. I have a list of my allergies. So, but you give it to the doctor, and then they turn around, I'm allergic to sulfa drugs, and prescribe me sulfa drugs. They had the information there, I tell them, but they don't listen. So how do you address that? I mean, that's why we don't tell the doctors. Y'all don't listen. And I have encountered a doctor that didn't want to touch me. And I told him, I got to leave. You going to diagnose me and you ain't looked at my ear, my mouth. I got to go.
Miss
You're
Catherine,
about
are
to
you my
get
mama?
ethnic. Say what now?
Are you my mama? Because she says the same thing.
Well, I'm sorry, I am a mama. My baby is 53, but I have my 8 great-grandkids.
Oh, wonderful.
So,
Miss Ursula, were you going to respond?
I'm sorry, but that's the way
No,
it
but
is.
that's-
Then
that's
y'all
true.
get
That's a
mad
true
'cause we
reality.
don't
That's a
tell
true
y'all
reality.
Everything.
You're
You
right.
don't
You're
listen.
absolutely right. You're
And I
absolutely
mean, I
right.
go in there prepared.
Yeah.
I don't have to take a list of my bottles of medication. I got a list of everything.
So you're
I know
doing your
what
part.
I take it, what I take, what it's for, and all that.
Yeah, you're doing your part.
But the doctors are not.
We're going to
So
see what
we
Miss
have to
Ursula has to
hold
say.
I'm sorry.
providers accountable. We want patients like you because most of our patients don't do their part.
Yes, yes.
So we have to hold patients accountable and we have to hold our providers accountable. And that's the answer. And that provider should be susceptible to that. I know most providers that I work with are good providers, they'll tell you, oh yeah, she's on it. She's gonna correct me, she's gonna this, she's gonna that. But that is exactly what we have to do because we have to remember first, our providers are human. They come with a lot of demands and a lot of everything, but when they meet this patient, that should be their patient and their concern, their first priority at that time. But we have to hold providers accountable. If you have your medications and you have your list, and there's a lot of things that come into play before it gets to the provider. You're gonna hand me as your provider your medications, but I'm not gonna be the one to actually put those medications into my system that's gonna come up on my screen to tell me that you're allergic to X, Y, and Z.
But before you even see me, a lot of times the doctor will look over the chart and they know a little history. And then they'll tell you ask you what medications you're on. And you'll tell them, and they ask you, you had this type of surgery or this type of illness. If you're a diabetic, then they know you're diabetic and the problem, the tingling or whatever might come from the diabetes, you know, but they're going to continue to ask you questions. But you got doctors out there that get offended because you ask.
That's when you
Because they
change
are the authority.
providers.
Oh, I do.
Anyone that's
I do.
offended by you asking a question, that's when you change providers. But not to defend providers, because I do believe that everyone has to be accountable. But providers, patients are upset because they say, well, you're gonna ask me this and this. She just asked me over here. And then when I walked in, they asked me. It's repetition because when they ask you, this person puts it in, but I don't want to take for granted that there wasn't an error there, so I'm gonna ask you again. And then when you get to the next step, they should ask you again because we want to remove human error, first of all, but sometimes you may have forgotten, or they may have put in there that you take Lipitor and it's Lomax, or they may have, you know, so we want to remove the possibility of human error, and that's the reason for the repetition of us asking you. But providers definitely should listen. Providers are limited so that the demand for a provider is greater. The patient encounters are greater. The CMS guidelines now and national guidelines kind of dictate the checkpoints that providers have to make or don't make. So when they go in the room, yes, you're their number one concern, but it's a lot of other determining factors
Okay,
that
if
come
we
into that.
respect the doctors should also respect
Definitely.
patients
Everyone
and
is due
treat
respect.
me like a person
Absolutely.
Yes,
rather
ma'am.
than patient 1, 2, 3.
Absolutely.
ma'am.
Amen.
That's not happening in all cases. So can y'all do something about that, or contact the medical schools
Well, I think
or
that's why
something to
conversations
let them
like-
know, hey, y'all got to do better.
Right on, that's well said.
Yeah.
The
Nurse
more we
Julia?
hold them accountable, the better people do.
Yeah.
People get away with bad behaviors because people tolerate bad behaviors.
right,
The
right,
more we hold people accountable, the better people do.
I know,
Right.
But we don't want y'all testing on us if y'all don't know what y'all doing.
Right
I
on,
mean,
right.
you know, we already have health issues.
Yeah.
Giving us more.
Yeah, you're
You
right.
understand?
You're absolutely right.
But
Nurse
thank
Julia,
you
were you
for
going to say
listening.
something? Were you going to say something? I just want to affirm exactly what she said, and I appreciate her honesty and sincerity because many of us have experienced encounters with our healthcare providers that went just that way. And so I do agree that we need to hold people accountable. I think it is that communication to be able to say to your provider, I understand you're busy, but right now I have this going on, and if you can't take care of it today, when can I? When can we talk? Can you call me? Can I make another appointment that I'm just getting my questions answered? Because I do think it is important that you feel like you're being heard. Yes, sir. And then, you want to answer the question?
Oh, absolutely no. I do not want to touch that. But I did want to ask Ms. Easy, but along that same line of what Ms. Catherine was just talking about, could you kind of go over how we look at the healthcare team that's managing these patients now coming in whom we suspect that may have a lung cancer or have risk factors for lung cancer or even have now been diagnosed? Just to that very thing. I mean, times have changed from when I've started and you got started in healthcare. So give me an idea of what this whole process looks like. Okay, that care team, if you would, Ms. Easy. The nurse practitioner, I want to hear from the nurse practitioner side first. I was curious.
Well, she's actually the expert on patient navigation.
Navigation, so Ursula.
Yeah, so I think she could
I think
better.
I was interested more from the practitioner side.
Yes.
And that was, not saying I don't want to hear, no, I do. But and clearly it's the second time this has come up. Where are we as practitioners falling apart? Where at one point it was this whole team led by a physician, and clearly that's not it anymore.
Right.
And so that we are addressing these issues. Somewhere along the way, so I'm curious about then, how do you see where we're falling short and how do we address these issues so we don't have this thing with the patient saying, hey, I don't trust what you guys are saying.
Gotcha. So I think that Ursula made a really good point when she spoke to the demand of the providers. I think, unfortunately, the U.S. healthcare system isn't set up to really spend enough quality time with the patient. I recently read some research that talked about compliance related to rapport and time spent in a room with the patient. And, without going too far in depth, I think it's pretty obvious that the more time that you can build and spend with the patient, the more time that you can really, have impact and some sustainable goals as it relates to their health care. Me personally, I try my best to speak in depth with every patient. I was speaking with Ursula earlier and telling her even in settings that don't call for it, I'm either getting on to someone about their blood pressure or something non-related, just using every opportunity to address their concerns. But to be honest, I think it's such a huge systemic issue. We could sit here and talk about it all day. I honestly don't have the answers as it relates to that, but I do think that each provider, it's up to them to hear the patients. I think a lot of times we go in the room and we know what we want to say to the patient or the information that we want to deliver, and I think if we could more so the time that we do have gear it towards hearing the patient out and hearing their concerns, I think that's key to make sure that they feel that their needs are met.
I think that's a good answer, actually, and with compliance and everything. But I think when we're looking for healthcare providers, and specifically in specialty care, we should look for providers that provide multidisciplinary approaches to healthcare. And when I say multidisciplinary approaches, that means that it is a team approach, and that you develop a team around your healthcare disease and your diagnosis, that you know that your physicians is working with other physicians and other specialties and other surgeons. And in cancer, we have a team that includes your oncologist, your radiation oncologist, your surgical oncologist, your navigator, your social worker, and your case is discussed with this team prior to you coming to talk about the latest in advancements in cancer, to talk about some provision mechanisms, to talk about a clinical trial that you may be eligible for, to talk about any other comorbidities that you may have, to talk about any barriers that the navigator may have discussed with you that's going to be a barrier to care. This multidisciplinary approach puts everyone on target and to expect your visit and to kind of know what they're dealing with before you walk in the door. So multidisciplinary treatment is cutting edge, and if you're on a disease-specific journey, your center should have a multidisciplinary approach to treat your disease.
You have a question, sir?
Yeah,
Step up.
my question is, how do we deal with hospitals today? Let me see. How do we deal with hospitals today when you're just a number? When you go in there, you're just a number.
Yeah, so similar to the other patient's question, because I guess she is a patient. Just looking at the system issues, and it's true, I mean, we can't sit here and act like these are not real problems. We are having a healthcare crisis as a result of COVID, where many of the times when you call your doctor's office, it's a long time before someone answers the phone. Your time to get an appointment is way out, and that's because there's a shortage in healthcare professionals. COVID took out a lot of people just in their areas of health, but many of your healthcare providers are stressed out and were sick and passed away, and COVID affected them too, but it was already a system that was overburdened. And like I think Ursula may have said, you know, your providers are people too. And not to make an excuse, but it becomes a systems problem where we have a greater demand than what we're able to supply it. And I think that also just means that in order to meet the way that we're providing care and the, you know, insurance, you look at insurance coverage, you look at a state like Atlanta or Georgia, sorry, Pastor, because I'm about to get in trouble, where we don't have Medicaid expansion. So a lot of people are still underinsured, which means you are relegated to go to places that are notoriously busy, and there are more providers, there are more patients than there are providers, because people don't have access to good health coverage to be able to go and get quality health care. So it is a systems issue. It is.
It is definitely a system issue, and it's another reason that we have to vote.
Yeah, gotta vote.
Voting is imperative.
Yep.
You have to vote. We have to, at some point, advocate for our needs, for the things that affect our communities and our environments. The hospitals are overloaded and understaffed. It's just a known fact. They're understaffed. Providers are limited. Certain areas are having a difficult time recruiting providers. So it's not that you are a number, but I also want us to use the resources that we have available appropriately. There are long waits in emergency rooms because we use the emergency rooms as a clinic. The emergency room is not a clinic. It's not your primary care physician's office. It's not urgent care. Emergency rooms are for emergency services. 90% of the things that come into the emergency rooms that cause the delays are non-emergent episodes that people could go to their urgent care centers, primary care physicians, or something else throughout the day. But they come to the emergency room, and then it delays that emergent patient. So we have to advocate for ourselves. We have to own our own stuff, and we have to vote. Because in order for us to want a solution, we've got to be a part of the solution. So we have to debunk our own things or our own contributors. Just like your lifestyle changes and everything, you've got to own your own and make your own changes so that you can make the system better. If you want your community better, it starts with you.
Thank you for that question. So ladies, we have about 30 seconds. Any closing remarks? And again, we were supposed to be talking about patient navigation and survivorship and that kind of stuff. But I still think that all of these were relevant because we're looking at the ways that our patients are living and the way they're having to navigate lung cancer and other kinds of chronic illnesses. Nurse Julia?
In closing, I would just say, again, you know, we're only as good as our advocacy for ourselves. And like Ursula said, we have to own our stuff in every aspect of our life. So I encourage you guys to be your best self-advocate and be intentional about your health.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I would close and say that the change starts with us. The change starts with you as an individual. In order to truly break down health equities, health disparities, and to seek our prevention and community outreach, we've got to go outside the four walls of your norm. So in order for us to truly reach the community, we've got to go outside the hospital. In order to truly reach the people, we got to go outside of the church. We've got to go outside of what we know to be our comfort zone and our norm. If you want to change or shake up anything, you've got to get uncomfortable. So that's with our health, with our lifestyles, with disparities. In order to make true and effective change, you've got to get uncomfortable, and you've got to be uncomfortable with making someone else uncomfortable. And that's how we change.
That's well said. Let's give these ladies a hand. Well, thank you to you all as an audience too. And next we're going to welcome to the stage our patient and caregiver panel. Come on down. You have your own microphone?
Is it on? It's on.
So let's welcome. Just have a seat. Introduce yourself.
So I just started. Get your microphone. You look familiar to me. I'll talk later. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roxy Hall Williamson, and it is amazing to be back in Atlanta. I literally just moved back home to Texas from here a couple of years ago. Longtime resident of Atlanta, so I'm glad to be here to speak with you today. I am currently a survivor of lung cancer. I am stage 4 non-small cell. Thank you. I do feel very blessed to be here today and alive to tell my story. And on stage with me is Mr. Beasley, who was a caregiver for his mother who passed of lung cancer. So we're gonna talk to you today from a patient and caregiver standpoint. I will begin by telling you my journey with lung cancer. I found out last year, about this time last year, I was having really, really severe headaches. And that was really weird because I'm not a headache kind of person. And I am in my 50s. And of course, being a Black woman of a certain age, everything is blamed on menopause. And it was not menopause. I went in on May 24th last year in the emergency room because I was feeling emergent. The pain was way too much to bear. By lunchtime the next day on the 25th, my surgeon was in the room telling me that it was imperative that I have emergency brain surgery. I am not presenting like a regular lung cancer patient. I'm not coughing, even to this day. I don't have a bad cough. I haven't coughed up blood. None of those traditional symptoms that people have. Well, after the brain surgery, the pathology came back a couple of weeks later that I was stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. So when it comes to patient navigation, I'm still in the early stages, still working through some things, connecting with resources, connecting with other people on my healthcare team, which I'm glad the panel before spoke about that because I'm in Galveston, Texas, which is much like Grady here is the home of University of Texas Medical Branch. And I'm fortunate that I have a really good mixture on my team between the cancer doctors at MD Anderson and the fellows and the students at UTMB. So between all of those folks, the oncologists, and I think I see an endocrinologist later this summer as well for some other issues that are going on. So that's just basically kind of the long and short of it about how I got into the process. And it's interesting in that everything that was just said on that last panel, I could amen and high five. I've been fortunate to have really good care. However, I have had a couple of issues with just some other parts of the team, some of the other nurses not necessarily following through with scheduling my appointments properly. Or one time I remember I was in and they literally forgot about me in the patient room. I went up to use the restroom and I came back and I think somebody may have come in when I was in the ladies' room, but either way, they forgot I was there. And if it weren't for me paying attention and listening to the nurses at the desk, they were getting ready to leave and they were like, "Oh, you sure all the patients are gone?" And the other nurse was like, "Oh yeah, I checked all the rooms." And I poked my head out, I was like, "No, you didn't. I'm still here." And they were floored because they didn't realize that someone was still there. So it is very, 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 very important that if you don't feel comfortable advocating for yourself, that you take someone with you who's not afraid to speak up. Fortunately for me, my mother is still with me. She's a retired nurse. So when I'm feeling some kind of way, I just call Mommy and say, "Mommy, can you go with me?" And she shows up and she shows out. And that's just, that's what you need sometimes. You know, you don't want to be ornery, you don't want to be a hard patient, but at the same time, you don't want folk walking over you and not listening and not paying attention to you, because this is your life. This is your life, and it's up to you to decide the quality of that life in your disease process. And I will, Mr. Beasley, would you like to jump in?
Well,
and
thank you,
maybe
Roxy.
tell
And
some of
we're
your
so-
story?
So grateful that you are fighting and a survivor, and you have the victory. I am, again, Maurice Beasley, and I had the honor and the privilege of supporting my mom, Samantha Beasley Davis, in 2016, once she received her diagnosis of small cell lung cancer. My mom had been a smoker for many years. I remember growing up being exposed to secondhand smoke, but she had been a smoker, more on than off. And she had gotten to a point where she was retired and no longer working. But she had this pressing pain. She said it was in her back. And so I encouraged her. I said, "Well, let's, go to the doctor." Eventually, she did go, and they did determine that she had small cell lung cancer. And that really began the journey. My role, being the son who was the closest, I was here in Atlanta. She's was in Birmingham. My role was to make sure she got to her doctor visits and that she went through her chemo. We were fortunate she had a sister, a younger sister, who was in Birmingham, who spent more time with her because I had to be here working as well. But during that 2016 time frame, I had enough sick leave that I could take a lot of time off. I was approved for FMLA, and that's important for you all. If you have FMLA, you can get approved to be off from work if you have the sick leave and be paid to care for someone in your family who is going through cancer. And being her son, I was approved for that. So I was able to do that and spend a lot of my time in Birmingham with her, taking her to the chemos, listening to the doctors and the nurses, and just allowing her to grapple with what she had to deal with. But to be four things that I would say, and I'll just use the letter P's. Present. I was present, and that meant taking her to her chemo appointments, to the doctor appointments, being there as she had conversations with the doctors, and engaging conversations with her when she felt comfortable. I was her son. And so, needless to say, it wasn't always easy to get mom to have a conversation with me. It was easier for her to talk to her sister at times. And then the sister would share with me whatever, my aunt would share with me whatever she felt like she needed to. But being present. The second one is being prayerful. I knew my mom was a very prideful person. And so I knew I couldn't always ask things that I really wanted to ask because she was shut down. And so I spent a lot of time just being prayerful and then looking for those moments where I could ask a question, how are you feeling? And, how's your relationship with the Lord? All of those things, because that was important to me. So being present, being prayerful, and then the next one was being prepared. I didn't know which way this thing was going to go. She did get better, but then after a moment of wherein she got better, it came back very aggressive, and she got worse. And so in the time that I was spending with her, I wanted to make sure that I was prepared to be whatever support she needed me to be, but also being prepared as her son to deal with what I was going to deal with and what my siblings and I were going to deal with and my relatives were going to deal with eventually if the disease continued to progress along, and it did. So being prepared. And then, of course, the last one I think is the most important one, is understanding that it's happening for a purpose. And God did share with me a little bit as to why some of this was happening. And I'll just be very honest with you. My mom had a lot of drama going on with her siblings, and there was a lot going on. And it wasn't necessarily the healthiest place to be for healing to take place. Does that make sense, everybody? And so I often tell with people, you have to create an environment for healing. An environment for healing. And it starts on the inside of you. It starts on the inside. And so being present, I was there, and there are times where we would just be in one space for hours, and she wouldn't say a word. She wanted to watch MSNBC. I remember that being on TV a lot. But she didn't say a word. But I'll tell you this, and I'll give it back over to Roxy. Those of you that are here at New Life, when I was appointed superintendent, the Friday before I was sworn in, that week, I had off. That was the July 4th week. So I went back to Birmingham because I had the whole week off to be with her. As a matter of fact, she had asked my aunt, when was I coming? And I sensed that that question came from somewhere. And so I went back, and I stayed with her that entire week. And that Friday morning, that Friday before the Monday I was sworn in, 7:46, that's when she made a transition. But it was all of those things, being present, being prayerful. It was making sure that I understood that there was a purpose to all of this. It was all of those things that helped me to support her in the way that I could. It's been 6 years now, almost 6 years. 6 years now. But I felt like, as her son, as a caregiver, I felt like I did what I was supposed to do to help her through that moment. We were preparing if she got better, that was great, but we were also being honest and preparing if the disease took its course, and it did. And so I just encourage all of us to be present, sometimes just being there, not always saying anything, just being there. Be present, be prayerful, be prepared to the extent that you can, and understand that all of it is for a purpose, for her, for me, for her sister. It was a purpose for all of us, and it was all connected. And so I'll say that.
Mr. Beasley, that is incredible and powerful. I like those P's. I think I'm going to adopt that because that has been sort of how I've moved through. And you touched on a couple of things that I kind of skipped over, so I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit before we start the Q&A. But I like that, those P's, the preparedness, being purposeful, just being prayerful mainly, because my faith is everything. And that was beautiful. But I'll go back a little bit on my story, because you touched on a couple of things. I didn't mention my smoking history. And for me, I grew up in a household with a mother that smoked as well, and she's currently navigating COPD. However, for me, it wasn't really cigarettes. It was more marijuana and the tobacco products that I used to smoke marijuana. And that was a whole thing too, because I have my whole group, right? We have folk that don't smoke cigarettes, but they smoke marijuana. We have folk that don't smoke marijuana, but they hookah. You know what I'm saying? Or they don't hookah and they vape. Like, it's such a layered conversation. You can't just assume people are doing one thing or another, or it could be a combination of things, right? So when I'm looking around this room, I see the most beautiful elders and people. And the people that you're probably really trying to reach are probably closer to my group of folks. It came up when we were talking about it in Houston, those smoking commercials, you know, the people with the things in their throat and they talk like this. And I was asked the important question, how does that resonate? And I'm looking around this room, everybody looks like me. We don't tend to connect with those things, right? That's not us, that's those people, that's their thing. We don't do that, though we know that that's prevalent in our community as well. So when I think about how we can have this conversation outside of this sanctuary, taking it back to the community, taking it back to the nephews and the grandkids and, you know, this new generation, they built different, right? And so you've got to be nuanced about the language you use with them and how you don't walk into it shaming people about their habits. Or like my granny used to say, you can hate the sin but still love the sinner, right? So we have to take that kind of mindset when we're having these conversations. And as we deal with our caregivers, because like you said, it's not easy. I know I'm not easy every day. I try to lean into my faith. But like this morning was a struggle, just the fatigue, just fighting the fatigue and getting around. Or I get oh, well, you look good, baby. You don't look like nothing wrong. But that's sort of a backhanded insult. Like, what am I supposed to look like? And thank God I don't look like what I'm going through, right? So that's a whole different layer to the conversations that we can have at home with the people that we love, right? And I agree with you, because it is something about that mother relationship. Mama just not gonna tell you everything. And I would back that up by saying, please talk to your folk. Tell them what you're going through. Tell them what you've been through. Make them understand that you've been through some things and you can share that life knowledge, because it does make a difference. I know I'm one. I love being with my elders. I love being with those women that pour into me. And in fact, before I went to the hospital last May, I was with my ladies auxiliary group from my church, and all those women are just as sweet. Most of them are retired nurses, and again, everything was menopause, right? But they meant well, right? Because that was their life experience, and they were just sharing that with me. And even though that wasn't my diagnosis per se, some of it is still menopause, but the main thing is they were there for me. They were there to pour into me and tell me it's gonna be okay, we're gonna figure it out. We may not have the answers, but we're gonna figure it out with you. And I think that's an important thing as well, just having those people in your network, whether they're your caregivers or they're just your friends visiting and spending time with you. It's important to share with people. Don't hold everything inside all the time. Because when you're gone, then what are the next generations going to have when it comes to medical history to be able to lean on and go to their providers and say, well, I know that my auntie, my grandmama had this, so I don't know how that affects me, but this is the history that I know. We need that because we don't share enough, right? We don't give enough of that information. And for me personally, I know I had cancer in my family, but I never knew like what kind of cancer or how, you know, how far back does this go in my family. And as far as I know, even today, I'm the only one that has lung cancer, even though there were it was like bone cancer and some other things going on. And fortunately for my diagnosis, and when it comes to the treatments as well, I wanted to touch on this. I'm not exactly sure what your mom had to do, if it was traditional, but I'm not on the traditional chemo treatments. I take a daily pill. And that's what the sister brought up in the last panel, and I want to nail down for everybody. As a community advocate, which is the work I was doing prior to my diagnosis, now my advocacy is expanded into the healthcare area now because it personally affects me. We need folk to vote, and it's more than just voting. It's more than just voting. When I did the lung cancer summit in DC a few months ago, there is legislation coming down the pike called MCED. It's Multi-Cancer Early Detection Coverage Act. I believe that's like the whole name of it. And each state, because I live in Texas, I moved from Georgia, we know these certain folk don't want to expand Medicaid. They don't want us to get the proper health care. So it's important that if you're already a voter, check in your area to see who your precinct person is or who your county people are. Connect on the grassroots level and do your part to not only vote, but encourage other people to vote, and then be those folk that help out at the polls and do all of those local things that don't cost you anything, just a little bit of your time, a lot of your talent in your eyes. Just like we have to hold these doctors and providers accountable, we have to hold these folk that are in office accountable and let them know that you see the legislation, you want the legislation, and you're gonna show up to show your support for the legislation. Because one of the hardest things I do as a grassroots advocate when I talk to my folk is making you understand that if you feel that, oh, they're just gonna do what they wanna do anyway, that's not true. They do what they feel pressured to do. And if you're not in the room applying pressure, then the squeaky wheel is gonna get the oil. That's just how it goes. They're not doing anything in their own little silos. They're responding to the folk that are responding to them. If you're blowing up their emails, if you're blowing up their phones and they say, okay, what do these people over here want? Because they blowing up my office. Well, how do we get these people quiet, right? So I'm gonna shut mine down.
No.
And Mr. Beasley, did you
Well,
want to add anything?
I'll just add as we close. A part of being present sometimes is just cooking a great meal, right? Just cooking a great meal, making a cake, or, and you know, you have to be mindful of their dietary restrictions, but just taking time to cook a great meal, and to also have a relationship with the nurses that are providing the care when they're getting the chemo and they're doing their doctor visits. And I'll say this, the moment when Mom shared with me about insurance and things of that nature, you know, that was the moment that I just really, it was grave. Because, you know, when your moms and your parents start talking about insurance,
And where those papers
and
are.
where those papers are, and showing, making sure I had the book with all the passcodes and the login numbers and all the login emails, et cetera. And that was, those are real moments. But they need to have those conversations with you. And they have a way of closing out. And my mom, the last week, she was getting very tired and resting a lot. So we had the children and my wife and others to come from Atlanta so she could see them. She could barely say anything to them, but she signaled to my wife and the children to come to her so she could just touch them. And that was their last moment with their grandmother while she was alive. They went back, but I was there when she finally departed. But I'll tell you this, that as a son and a caregiver, you all, there are options out there. And I'm a donor. I will the day I expire, all of my organs are going not in the grave, they're being donated. Whatever's working, somebody can have it. So I encourage you, to think about it, because even the lungs can be transplanted now. And so there are people that could benefit from your lungs. And so there are many options today, probably more than existed 6 years ago, because medicine is really advancing and creating new remedies. So I encourage you to just get informed. And thank you, Pastor, for this opportunity. Justin, for the invitation. Thank you, Roxy. But just get informed, and because there are many options. And whatever you do, just create a space of healing. And that was really my commitment, creating an environment where healing, not fussing and not throwing mistakes up. There's a time for all of that. There's a time not for that.
Exactly, and that's not the time.
It's a time for healing and to make the person as comfortable as possible so they can fight as much as they can and have peace to the extent that is possible.
Yes, and one last thing, it was mentioned in the previous panels, the targeted therapies are amazing. As it was mentioned earlier, lung cancer is the most deadliest, it's the least funded. However, the therapies coming from this area of science is advancing all of the other cancers. Like I mentioned, I'm on a daily pill. I don't have to go in the hospital and get things stuck in my chest. And because I did not have any other underlying conditions, it made me more of a candidate for the targeted therapies. So just think about that, and please know that every patient will have to talk about their end of life. So don't be that person, oh, I don't want to talk about that. They have to talk about it. Be a soft place for them to land, to discuss it and get it off their chest, so they don't have that as another stressor to worry about what's going to happen if I close my eyes tomorrow. So we're open for questions, if anyone has any questions. No? Awesome. Come on, Miss Catherine, come on up to the mic. I was hoping you would have something to say. You had me over in the corner, amen, and about to holler out my seat. No, don't apologize. That's exactly, we need more people expressing themselves like you, especially that look like us in this space, because we're typically overlooked, or, you know, that old thought, oh, they don't hurt as much, or they have a better tolerance for pain, and that's untrue. We hurt like everybody else, right?
Okay, my first question is, can you donate an organ if you have chronic illnesses, like if you've had cancer or diabetes or high blood pressure? Are your organs good enough to be donated?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I just know that I'm a donor on my card, and I guess they have a process, but you know, when you get your driver's license, you donate.
Right.
And that's, as far as I know, that's all I know.
You don't, Miss Catherine.
Dr. Ursula is going to address
I'm
it.
not a physician, but
Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Ursula.
when you agree to be an organ donor, you go through a series of tests to see if you're eligible or if you're healthy enough to donate those organs. So the donor have to go through a series of medical exams and tests to see if they're eligible to be able to donate.
Is this prior to them saying they're going to be a donor?
No, you can say that you're going to be a donor, but if you're interested in being a donor, you have to go through those series of tests.
Okay. And I just want to thank you for being there for your mother. When I was going through my chemo and my radiation, I only have one son, and he was there. He was my confidant, and I thank you for that.
Thank you.
You brought back memories, and I thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for speaking up. Thank you.
First, I want to commend both of you on your journeys. This is what it's really all about, the patient and the caregivers. But I want to answer a question that was asked on the panel about what we do, because you brought up a very important thing about legislation. And in this arena, pencil and paper and phone calls goes farther than our emotions and brute. When you say about what you do about those physicians and what you do about those healthcare facilities that treat you like numbers, you call your legislators. You put pen to paper and you write the administrators of those hospitals. Just this week, we got the national leapfrog surveys back from our hospitals. And I've been in healthcare long enough to know that when those scores go down, changes happen. Positions all of a sudden are eliminated. You look up people here today and they're gone tomorrow. Put pencil to paper, because what they expect us to do is quit and say that we're not going back there anymore, or that we don't want this or we don't want that. But these are your facilities, your taxpayer dollars that make these facilities run and operate. So you have to be able to advocate and hold legislation accountable to make things happen in those arenas.
I agree, and it's really deep. Thank you for that. It gets really deep, especially, again, being in these southern states where they won't expand Medicaid and those kinds of things. Hospitals are closing left and right, here and there. And before you have nowhere to go, now's the time to apply that pressure. Apply that pressure to them, because the other side does, and you see where that's getting us right now. So be the voice of good, be the voice of reason, lean in, look around your community and see what you really need. And don't be afraid to speak up. Go to your city council and let them know, hey, we need a clinic over here. They will listen if you show up and voice your concerns.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for this opportunity. And we'll, at this time, Roxy, we'll give it over to our pastor. Let's give him a hand as he comes.
Yes. Thank you again, Pastor Harris. Thank you. And I just want to drop this, if I can, real quick. My Lyft driver loves you. When she found out where I was coming, she said, oh, baby, I love that Pastor Harris now. Do you go to church over there? Well, I'm coming back, because I let him know I'm coming. So Ms. Ramona and her family will be seeing you soon, okay? I got a whole speech about you and what you do and how you advocate, and I can't think of a better testimony about what you do here. And I'm just meeting you, and I just feel very blessed to be here. And please keep doing what you do and encourage your fellow clergy to do the same.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Would you please give all of our panelists a hand, and her Lyft driver? Give them another hand. This has been a tremendous day of great information. Yes, they deserve it. They deserve it. So you learned a lot today, didn't you? A lot of learning took place today. So we've got just a few moments, and I just want, you don't have to come to the mic, I'll say what you said, but what was one big thing, just one big thing that stood out to you that you don't want to forget? And you can just stand up and blurt it out loud. Say it again. Go get tested. I love that. Go get tested. Yes. Anybody else? One big thing you learned. Be your own advocate. Be your own advocate. If you don't care for your own health, I promise you, other people will not also. Not just your own personal advocate, but advocating for your community, advocating for your neighborhood and for your folks. Excellent. One more. What did you learn? Don't smoke. And if you are smoking, stop smoking, right? Don't smoke, but not just don't smoke, but practice healthy habits. Just as easy as it is to have a bad habit, it's just that easy to have a good habit as well. Practice healthy habits. And one last one I saw in the back. And he says that this whole event brought his awareness up. And that's what this is about, increasing our awareness. We've got some amazing partners in this, and I've mentioned Amgen, the pharmaceutical company that is partnering with this event to bring it to you and helping to cover some of the costs for that, and also a very, very key partnership for this community, for African American communities around the country, and that is with Heal Collaborative. And they are on the front lines of making certain that awareness is given and that we all are empowered, because information is power. If you know better, then you can do better. And Heal Collaborative has given so much of their time and energy, expertise, and networks and connections to bring that information to our community. So would you please help me say thank you to Heal Collaborative for their support. Mr. Howard Mosby is here, and the whole Heal team. Stand up if you're connected to Heal in any capacity, Yes, 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 yes. I want to give a big thank you to New Life Community Alliance for its service and its work. We do enormous amounts of service and programming in this community, trying to make certain that we better the life of those who live in the South DeKalb area. And that's not just in one area, but it's holistically in all areas. Our team and our staff do an amazing job. Please give New Life Community Alliance a strong, strong hand and a big thank you. Now we're getting ready to end. Before we do, I have one more person that I want to give a big thank you to. This young man does a phenomenal job at corralling us together, bringing these issues to the forefront, and organizing and administrating these events. When you see this doesn't just come together. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of project management. And I'm so honored to have Justin Williams, our project manager. He's doing double duty for Heal and New Life. Come on and give him another hand. He did a phenomenal job. Great job. Write this down if you would. First of all, next week, May the 20th, Saturday. I want you to be here, but here's the challenge next week. Don't come by yourself. You got to bring somebody with you or some people with you. Tell it to your community, tell it to your friends, your neighbors, family members. If there is a stubborn aunt that you've been trying to get to stop smoking or to eat right or to practice better habits, bring her or him to this event, and it'll be an eye-opening event for them to hear the information that's being shared. We're going to be talking about different aspects of this next week. We're also going to touch on many of the same aspects we covered today, but looking in a whole different direction on next week. So please make certain that you have some folks with you in the room. That's next week, May 20th, Saturday, 10 a.m. We start at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. If you're watching online, please make certain that you are in front of that screen next week at 10 o'clock. Second thing I want you to please mark down, and that is newlife-atl.org. newlife-atl.org. That is the church's website, and you'll be able to access a recording of this event from our website and from our YouTube page. If you go to YouTube, just put in New Life Decatur. New Life Decatur in YouTube, or that website that I gave you earlier. And this entire event, the panel, and all the conversation we've had today is going to be on that YouTube channel, and it'll be there as long as the internet is the internet. So you'll be able to watch it and encourage others in your family and your friendship circles to watch it as well. Last thing I want you to do is there is a post-workshop survey that was given to you when you came in. We really need everyone to fill that out. Answer those questions. Take just a few moments, fill it out, answer the questions. If you don't have something to write with, we'll make sure we get that to you. We need that information to help us bring better quality experiences of healthcare information to our community. And if it says Texas on there, we mean Atlanta. We spell Atlanta T-E-X-A-S. So if it says Texas, we mean Atlanta. By all means, fill those out. You'll be a big help to us. We've got to-go boxes for lunch for you that's provided by our sponsors. And so please, everyone, please stop by and get a box to go, some food to eat. It's healthy food for you to have on your way going home. Those of you that are online, thank you so much for being with us and sticking with us through this entire event. We are praying that it was beneficial for you and that you will share it with others as they can watch on the same channel, the same platform that you're watching. We'll have this up ready for them to watch as well. All right, let's all stand and prepare ourselves to be dismissed. Father, thank you so much for the blessing that you've given to us in information. I am so grateful, God, that you have gifted so many people to learn, to be educated, to provide services to better our health. All of our doctors and all of our medical practitioners, our nurses, those who care for us in the professional field. I just pray your grace upon them, that you would give them tender hearts and open hands, that they would have a heart to love the people that they care for, that we would put care back into health care. And I thank you for the sacrifices that they make, long hours that they work, the countless numbers of people that they see, and the dangers that are attached to their jobs, the exposures that they have. I thank you, God, that they are on the front lines fighting for our health. Would you bring quality medical practitioners into this field to care for those of us who need it? And then, Father, I thank you for those caregivers from home, like those on our panel this morning, who have cared for their loved ones and have honored the commitments and sacrifices that their loved ones have made as they fight diseases. I pray that you would give our caretakers patience, give our caretakers all of those things that they need: presence, preparation, understanding that there is a purpose. Give them those pieces that they need to help the people that we love fight the fights that we're fighting. And I thank you for the power of healing, that when medicine and chemo and all the other things that we do, that as we do it, we add prayer to it. And I thank you, God, that you hear us when we call. You are stronger than cancer. So we come against fear and anything else that would hinder clarity and sanity as we fight these fights of these diseases. And we give you praise for it. In Jesus' name, amen and amen again. I love you guys. We'll see you all Saturday, 10 o'clock. God bless.